Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Where does the chat show up here? Hang on. There we go. Okay. Can everybody hear us okay? I'm going to hope that's a yes. Yes. Thank you, Diana. Okay. Hello. Welcome to Producing 101 Part 2. For those of you who didn't join us for our Producing 101 Part 1 from a couple weeks ago, that is available on our YouTube, and there's a link to it on our website. So today we're just going to go into a bit more in-depth stuff based off of what questions people had last time. I'm Emily Dix. This is Conor Fitzgerald. I'm going to let him lead us through there. I guess we'll very briefly tell everybody who we are. So I started the TITC a couple of years ago. It was an idea I had for a long time. I've been working in indie theater in Toronto for about a decade, and I found that while there were lots of great people out there who were all really connected on an individual basis, indie companies were not really sharing resources the way that I thought we should. So the TITC was formed to try and fix that. Outside the TITC, I run a company called Bygone Theatre, which focuses on shows that were written or directed in the early to mid 20th century. Conor is the chair on that. Yeah, and I've worked as just about everything in theater, design, costume design, especially as a director, stage manager. I've worked as a producer with companies like Tarragon, Crow's Theatre, Theatre 20. And yeah, that's the quick little rundown of me.
And I'm Conor Fitzgerald. I'm a current law and MBA student at York. I have always been in the business world. I took a commerce degree originally, and immediately, that was in Alberta, and I moved here to Toronto to try to get into the film world. I've always had a passion for the arts, so I've worked in the administration of film and theater for the past 5 years, 6 years. I don't know how long it's been.
A while.
What year is it? I don't know. So yeah, I've been chairing Bygone Theatre since 2015, and I have worked on film, everything from a production assistant to a production coordinator to a producer to development, attending sales markets, and that sort of stuff. And I'm now going to school for, as I said, to enhance that and get more into the high-end executive sort of roles within the arts.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit already about what the TITC is. I'm just going to pull up our website here so you can see. So you can learn all about the TITC on our website, which is thetitc.ca. You can see here we've got our mandate, code of conduct. You can learn how to join us. Stage Door is like sort of a blog that is connected with us that focuses specifically on indie theater. So that's where we'll do reviews, top 10 lists, editorial stuff. You can see our Instagram is linked here, our current member companies. And then a thing that's important for today is if you go to workshops and events, underneath the drop down there, resources. It's not a fancy looking page yet. I just made this quick last night, but you can go into here, into our Producing 101 webinar, and this is where you can download the contract template and the budget template. And we've got our PDF from our last webinar, and we'll put this one up after too, though there's not as much in this one. So you can download those to follow along today, use them if they're helpful. Yeah, and if you've got any questions, like Diana's just asked something here, if anyone has any questions, just type them in the group chat. I think is probably the best way to do it. Let's see. I encourage everyone to check out our website to look at how to join. There are no membership fees. You can join as an individual or as a member company. And basically, the only thing you have to do is agree to help support your fellow artists. We all share each other's stuff. We share resources. I won't go into all of it now, but check it out. Okay, so now we'll go back to our PDF. That's how you get involved. Sorry, we have so many windows open and my computer is just, it's dying.
So today is really going to focus entirely on contracts and budgets, and then we'll have some time afterwards for Q&A. So with contracts, I'm going to go over some like what a contract is at its core, as well as some common clauses that you should look out for. For budgets, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we'll give an overview of how we've set up the budget template and what sort of elements are a part of that. And then we're actually going to do an example budget to show you how that works and how we go about finding the information that goes into a budget and what considerations we have as we develop that. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A.
Yeah, and I'll just mention quickly at the start here, of course, none of this is actual legal advice. We do both have experience creating and executing contracts, but we're not lawyers yet. Everything we're sharing is based off of our own experience, which is professional experience, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we're like experts on it. It doesn't mean that there aren't other ways to do it. So please, you know, use this as a guide, but don't take everything we say as
it's our opinion.
It's our opinion
in our experience.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. So let's go into contracts. So Conor is going to go through all of the fun legalese of things. If anything, I'm going to try and ask him questions whenever he's getting into his like lawyery mode and saying stuff that most of us won't recognize.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's anything that you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about, just pull it up in the chat. I'm monitoring that there.
Okay. So when we talk about a contract, a lot of people think wholly about the piece of paper that they sign at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, what that is a way to express what a contract is. And I know that's already getting a little strange, but all a contract is in essence an offer which is accepted for the exchange of what's called consideration, which can be anything of value, and then the performance of the agreement. So what an offer is somebody going to you and saying, hey, can you do this thing? For example, can you be my stage manager for $500? That's an offer. There is no contract yet. You've just put it out there and said, hey, I want you to do this thing. Then if that person says, yes, that sounds good, that's acceptance. Now, acceptance and a contract is only formed then if there is consideration. So as I said, that can be anything of value. So usually in our world, that is labor, money, share of profits, but it doesn't have to be what they call, it doesn't have to be equivalent value, right? So like I could agree to work on a show for 1 cent, but just saying, will you work on my show for free is not actually forming a contract. You have to give them something in return. That could be a credit or a recognition, or there's a variety of ways to do it, but you have to be giving something in return, or nothing actually exists.
It's because a contract is something between two people, right? It's
Yeah.
not just, it's not you writing a promise to somebody. It's you making some kind of agreement, even if it seems weighted strangely.
Yeah. The word is called a bargain, which is, like, we hear that a lot, but a bargain is an exchange of value. So that needs to be within a contract. And then performance is also important. If it never happens, if what is agreed to never happens, then it's also not in existence. So some of the other terms I have up there, revocation. So that means in the period between when you make an offer to somebody and when they accept that offer, it can be revoked. You can say, no, I'm sorry, I'm no longer offering that to you. As soon as they accept it, you can't go back on that. But up until they accept it, you can say, I'm sorry, that's off the table. That includes if they come back and say, oh, I'll be your stage manager, but for $700, you can say, well, I revoke my original offer, and no, I don't accept that. And then there's nothing, right? You don't have an obligation then. But if you offer something and they accept that, then there's an obligation formed.
Yeah. So it's not schoolyard rules of like, well, you said you would do this. It has to actually happen both ways.
Yeah.
Just because I said, yeah, I want to hire you as a stage manager, doesn't mean that then I can't go and change it as long as we haven't already actually entered into that contract on both sides.
Yeah. So usually the reason that we put everything into a piece of paper and then sign it is that it's proof that all of these things have happened. It's proof that there's an offer and that it's been accepted because we both sign, both sides sign. And then we have the consideration, the payment, the value written out within it. And we have the performance conditions, what must happen for that to be performed. All of that is written out, and then by signing it, we say, see, this is proof that we've done it. There are a lot more complicated ways to go about it and different ways you can build a contract, but that I don't think we need to go into that sort of stuff. One little thing that you might see in a lot of contracts is right above the signature page, and this can actually be useful for us. If it says sign, sealed, and deliver, that word seal is actually carries a lot of weight. If a contract says it is sealed, that means that you do not have an obligation to provide consideration within the contract. That is somebody acknowledging that they're giving up their rights to receive something in return.
Can you give a plain language example of that?
Well, if you made a contract and said, you are going to be my stage manager, you will not get a profit share, you will not be paid, and you will be uncredited. That would be a terrible, I'm not going to comment on whether or not, you should not
don't do it.
But if that was what the contract said, and then at the end it said this contract is signed, sealed, and delivered on such and such date, and then it is signed by both parties, then technically you've accepted a contract without consideration. You've accepted the whole contract. It's to say, I know everything that's in here, and I accept that these terms.
Yeah. I've never seen that in the kind of contracts we hand out to people. For those of you who are actors, that's where you may be more likely to come across something like that when you're working with bigger companies. But don't add that into if you're doing like little indie profit share shows, don't try and add that stuff. There's no need for it. It gets more complicated. Just leave it.
So the other two terms I have there are frustration and duress. So frustration is when a contract cannot be performed because of some reason. Now, what those reasons are varied, and I can't really get into that. And really, it would be, I don't think in our industry, we would not often get into a case where we'd be arguing the legal way of frustration. But if we think of frustration as like the performance of a contract can not possibly happen. For example, if a theater closed down.
Well, we can use COVID as an example.
I don't want to use COVID as an example because that's a different thing.
Okay, I'm gonna
If
stay
a
out of it.
theater, if you had a performance set to happen in a specific theater at a specific time, and that theater just no longer existed, it got bulldozed, then you might say that because the show was dependent on that theater existing, that the contract between you and your stage manager has been frustrated because they can no longer do their part because you contracted them to be a stage manager for a show at this theater. This theater doesn't exist. The contract is frustrated and no longer exists. That's probably the best way I can describe it. It's very, very uncommon that frustration would happen, as I said, but it's something to keep in mind that if something doesn't...
it has to be wholly outside of you, right? It can't be like, we're not doing the show anymore because we didn't pay the theater the money on time, and so they're not letting us do the show. That's not frustration.
And I'll talk about COVID actually in just a second when I talk about specific terms. Duress is actually at the signing stage. So when somebody is accepting a contract, if they are pressured into signing, or if they're signing without being given an opportunity to fully understand what they're signing, then you might say that they're under duress. So if it's like, well, you hand somebody, you give somebody an offer, you say, hey, stage manager, I want, will you stage manage my show for $500? Here's a contract. The offer is open for 5 minutes. Somebody can't possibly go over that for 5 minutes. They're under duress. They might sign it just because they're like, oh, I don't want that opportunity to lapse. I need my $500. And you might have something in that contract that actually says any verbal promises for money are void, right? And they're just signing away and they're never going to get that money anyway. The contract's invalid, and you might have, then it would start getting complicated, and that's when you start actually having to talk to lawyers and stuff.
That's something, again, for any of you who are actors, I've heard this so many times with shifty agents. It's like, oh, I'll sign you, but you've got to do it now. I might see someone new tomorrow, and then I've got no room on my roster. So I don't know how often duress would come up with us as producers contracting indie artists, but it is definitely something that some shady people use. So keep that in mind. Don't let yourself do that. And if you have done that and signed something under duress, that's when it can be worth reaching out to a lawyer and being like, this is not right. And
also don't give practices. As somebody who's giving somebody a contract to sign, you should be giving them an opportunity to fully read it, and giving them an opportunity to seek independent legal counsel. So they should be able to take it away with them, talk to people, get advice on whether or not they should sign it. Mm-hmm. So if you are under strict timelines as a producer, you should leave at least 1 to 3 days for people to sign their contracts, just as to make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure everybody feels comfortable.
Yeah.
And don't expect people to do work until a contract is signed either.
Yeah. What we do personally with Bygone is we have a pretty standard contract. So when we send out, we've explained just, through like both at auditions and in the offer, we've explained a lot of the stuff. Then when someone accepts the offer, we send them a copy of the contract. Then at our first read through, we have the hard copies there, and we always sit through and take like half an hour to read through and go through every part and be like, does everyone understand what that means? And then at the end, some people will sign it right then. Some will come back to us in a few days with it. We encourage them to take it to your agent if you've got it or whatever. And just make sure that it doesn't benefit anyone to try and trick somebody into signing something. So we've got a question here.
Yeah, I believe it's Natasha.
Why would someone want to put another person under pressure?
Unfortunately, it's to gain advantage for themselves.
Yeah.
So if you put somebody under pressure and rushed along, usually that means, like, if somebody is doing that to you, your first thought should be there's something that is that I'm giving up, like a right of mine,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is some of your fundamental human rights, you can sign those away, though you would have recourse generally. Whether or not there are conditions on being paid that are bad, whether or not it's usually some sort of exclusion, or which I'll get to exclusions, or something that really heavily benefits them.
People will too have you sign something that's illegal. Mm-hmm. And the best example I have for that isn't in theater, but actually with like renting a home. You see that a lot in somewhere like Toronto, where there's a lot of competition. And I'm sure the same kind of thing happens anywhere where there's competition. Just because somebody puts something in a contract, if it's something that's illegal, then that's void. You can't agree to do something illegal. So you couldn't have someone sign a theater contract and have them agree to work for an entire week straight, being up 24 hours a day. You could, okay. It's a random example. My better examples are with renting a home, right? They're not allowed to say to you, oh, you can't rent this home. If you get pregnant, you have to move out. That's illegal. Doesn't mean you won't see something like that in a contract. And part of that is ignorance of the law on both sides. People might think that if they put it in a contract, they can make you do it. And I think, unfortunately, more often, they assume that the person signing it doesn't know any better. Yeah. So that's why it's really important for you to understand your rights, both when you're signing contracts and when you're creating them, and making sure that everybody understands them. Because, yeah.
I'll talk about that in a bit more in a second. But if you were to sign an illegal contract, so a contract that had you doing something illegal, for example, if you were required to steal all of the props that were going to be in the show, if those things happen, if it is an illegal contract, then that would be another thing coming back that would frustrate the contract, and it wouldn't exist. The contract or at least specific terms of the contract wouldn't exist, depending on the severity. And then there might be additional things. And again, if those sorts of things happen, if you're getting into that stuff, that's when you get legal advice from a lawyer.
Can we maybe just quickly mention too, because I don't know if we have it in here, about age of consent? If you are doing a show and you're working with children, we do have them sign as well, because it's tricky. Like, you could be working with a 17-year-old, and so they can't legally sign a contract. Their parents will have to do it. You'll have, signature of parent or guardian, but you want the minor you're working with to also understand it. So it's important that both the parent and the minor completely understand what's happening and completely agree. And honestly, my advice for indie theater is to avoid working with minors. We've done it for one show, and she was great, and it was fine. But it can get really tricky. So if you can, just don't do it.
So what I'm going to do now is I'll get into some essential pieces of a contract that you're going to want to consider. So I'll give a quick overview now, and then I'm going to show you in the contract template that is available on the TITC.ca what those clauses actually end up looking like. So the first thing, when we're working in any creative space, there's always copyright. And copyright is a complicated thing. In Canada, it's an automatic thing. So if that interacts differently depending on your relationship with a person. So most commonly, this would be with the writer of a play. So if you are contracting with a writer as the producer, you have to make sure that how their copyright is handled within the show is considered. So once somebody has created something in a demonstratable way, so that could be writing something on a piece of paper, that could be performing it, that could be recording it, anything like that, then they have a copyright in that for 50 years after the death of the author. That's just an automatic right that is inherent in authorship. So if you're doing a play with something that was already written, then you have to obtain the right to do that, to perform it for the specific, in the specific way and for the specific time in which you are performing it. It can be as simple as just author so-and-so grants the right to perform this, the play for the run of the show in so-and-so place, you know, and like that's enough. You can be as broad or as narrow as possible, but you have to make sure that you're being given the right to do that.
Yeah, so that includes anything from going to Samuel French and getting a thing and signing their contract and being very specific about everything, to your friend wrote a play and it's like, hey, would you produce this for me? You still need to go through the same kind of thing and make sure that it's really clear. And again, maybe a good example for that is there have been fringe shows that then go on and become really successful shows, Drowsy Chaperone or something like that. The reason it's important to get the rights and everything is not just for that initial run, but so that it's clear who owns what, so that if you have success and then go and want to take it on somewhere else, you know how to do that and it's fair for everybody involved.
So there are also different copyright relationships that can be made. So for example, if you are a producer and you have a concept for a new show and you hire somebody to write your concept, then you may be, again, if you're getting into these sorts of these specific situations, it's always good to get legal advice about how you should structure relationships. And there's great resources to do that, including the Artists' Legal Advice Services, ALAS. Or most lawyers will give, so they give 30-minute consultations on just what the law is. Most lawyers will also give free 30-minute consultations on specific pieces, and then they'll advise you whether or not you need further legal advice. But a work for hire agreement is when you hire somebody to do a specific piece of creative work. And in that case, the person who is doing the hiring has the copyright, so you don't have to consider that, like getting the rights for that. It's very uncommon in our field because we don't have money. And usually when you're doing that, you have to hire somebody as an employee and provide them with all the benefits of being an employee, including, you know, that's tax deductions, that's all of those sorts of things. So it's uncommon, but it's important to consider, especially if you yourself are also a writer in the other case. And if you're hired, you can be hired as an independent contractor, which is what you retain the most rights with. You can be hired as an employee in a work for hire arrangement in which you don't get any rights. So if somebody hires you on to be a writer and they're saying this is a work for hire employee, you will never have rights in that. It's not your own thing.
And to learn more about that stuff, just Google the Ontario workplace, wait, I just totally blanked on what it's called, to go over the difference between employee and independent contractor, because that's the thing we could spend a very long time on. It's something that you should Google and look at. And the main point I would pull out of that is that just because somebody calls you an independent contractor doesn't mean you are one. If you were treated like an employee, then you are an employee. And again, that can get complicated, but look into that stuff. Make sure you understand it, especially if you're working with larger companies. I know we have definitely worked places where we were hired and told we were independent contractors, but treated like employees. And sometimes people do that to try and get around basically having to pay you more, usually.
Benefits is the biggest thing that you do not have to provide to independent contractors.
Yeah.
So that gets into this type of work thing. So generally when we're contracting people as producers, we are hiring independent contractors. It provides the most flexibility and the least obligations on the person doing the employing. Independent contractors, very importantly, get to determine how they do the work. They are given tasks and then they can complete it. So that's when you're hiring professionals, in which we are. You know, you hire a lighting designer, you aren't overseeing their design work. You may get to approve their design work, but you're not overseeing the way in which they design, which in an employee relationship, you have a boss who oversees everything that you do.
Mm-hmm. And controls your hours. As an employee, they can say you come here 9 to 5. As an independent contractor, with some exceptions, you make your own hours. Now, when it comes to theater, and there might be a time when it's like you literally need to be in the theater to program it, that's fine. You set that stuff out at the beginning, but you can't complain to your lighting designer, oh, you're not answering your email at 9 a.m. because they're a contractor, they can do what they want.
So it's also important to have contracts, which some people don't think about, with volunteers and students. And volunteer is a specific section of workers, which are still allowed to have the same, workplace conditions and considerations as an employee or an independent contractor, but are unpaid. So as long as it specifies that they are acting as a volunteer, generally they are still getting some, like there's a benefit to being a volunteer, even though they're giving that to you. So it's generally a less complicated consideration, but you still have to think about that. And like I said before, you still have to give that offer and set out what their duties are going to be so that everybody knows where they stand and what their obligations are. And the same with students. Now that gets a little bit more complicated if you're using government programs and funding and those sorts of things, but they would provide you, they provide guidance on how to do that. For example, the summer employment programs that the government of Canada offers, which is a great way for small companies to get started on having employees. But generally, if you're just having student volunteers helping with it, that you're providing, for example, we often get students on because Ontario has a requirement that all high school students do 40 hours of volunteer hours. So we contract them very specifically to say these are volunteer duties that you can do for your volunteer hours, and then you have to sign a thing saying yes, they were here for that amount of time, and all that sort of stuff.
It's a very simple thing. That, though, just as a note, is a great way to get some people to help. And if you've got a company that wants to have any kind of youth initiative, we've been doing that since our second production, and some of the kids have stayed with us throughout, and they're great. Obviously you have to think of what you can expect from a high school student, but outside of the 40 hours, there are scholarships available for people who do a lot of volunteer work. So we've had some who come and just want to get their 40 hours, and some who keep coming back for things. Mm-hmm. It's a really good way to get some people to help with stuff. Like we've had them as ASMs. The ones who are interested in design, we've had them shadow things and do stuff like that. And some of them just come and take tickets because they just want the hours. So it's a good way to get some extra help.
So the next thing I'll talk about is duration or term of contract. This is an important piece because you have to define from like when it starts and when it ends, because that defines the obligations that somebody has. And it's something that it's easy to forget about, where you're just kind of like, I just want this person to come on. But it can, if you don't have that defined, like how the relationship is going to continue in a time space, in space time, within a certain amount of time, then it becomes very confusing, and there could be, again, that could be something that could potentially frustrate a contract if you were taking advantage of not having a time frame, or being taken advantage of by not having a time frame. So define, I guess the point is to define as much as you can within a contract.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to exclusions. So indemnity and force majeure are the two most common exclusion clauses that you'll see, and you probably have heard these terms before in some way. Force majeure, especially right now during COVID, is very commonly being enacted. So in brief, indemnity is saying that the other party has no obligation, or it's giving away rights of, giving away liability and rights of repercussions, right? So you're saying, like, you're not at fault if this thing happens. So you have to be careful about what an indemnity clause is actually saying, because sometimes you're giving up the right to be covered under an employee's insurance. And as a producer, you should be considering what you're indemnifying yourself of and what you're indemnifying other people of. So for a producer, it's good to indemnify yourself of other people's carelessness. So if somebody does something that is negligent, that would mean that they do something that they know is wrong, or should know is wrong. They do it and it causes damage or problems to your production. You want to say, I'm not responsible for that. You are personally responsible. If you are, like, if I hire you as a lighting designer and you knowingly wire something that causes a fire, that's not on me. Or could cause a fire, like if you have open wires, like you should know that. As a professional lighting designer, you should know that you can't have open wires and spill your coffee on it. Like, that's just plain knowledge, and as a producer, you don't want to be liable for that. On the other hand, you want to maybe give them indemnity for your negligent actions. Usually, if you have an indemnity clause that only goes one way, you do not want to sign that in your life. It's always a give and take. Because if you're being employed by somebody and they say, hey, listen, if you do something negligent, I'm not liable for that. But it doesn't go the other way, then if they do something negligent that could be put on you, you might have liability for that. And that's really important to know, and look for that back and forth and how it interacts. But that negligence is the main focus of indemnity and what you really want to look for. Force majeure is an act of God clause. So I think this is a good time. I'll bring up what that looks like, because it is weird.
I'm going to just mention quickly in there, one time you might see some indemnity stuff, and we're not going to go into equity contracts, because you can go on the equity site and find everything. But there are extraordinary risk riders is something you might come across. That's for if you've got, I mean, what they call an extraordinary risk can range. Like, it could be having an actor stand on a pedestal that's 6 feet tall. It could be having somebody doing aerial acrobatics. When you get into stuff like that, that's where you may find some indemnity things. All right, back to force majeure.
Yeah, so you'll see first my indemnity clause in this sample. It says the role. I have it highlighted. Anywhere you see it's highlighted, that's something that should be changed with what the role is responsible for their own conduct. And so it's saying they're responsible for their conduct. They're not responsible for my conduct as a company, and vice versa, right? So that this contract is meant to be in plain language and easily understood. I tried to eliminate as much of that legalese as you might see. Force majeure. So this is pretty common. So neither the person or the company is liable for failure to perform when the breach is due to, and these are pretty common in every contract. So regulations of public authorities, that would be like a law, or that would, like,
Well,
for
COVID
example,
would fall under that.
well, COVID would fall under a few of these. So
Yeah.
a law that keeps us inside, so it's canceled. Strikes might happen with IATSE or that sort of thing. Inclement weather would have to be very severe to enact a force majeure, like a tsunami or something like that.
We had a hurricane here once. Yeah.
Those things that actually prevent somebody from being able to long term, or a blizzard that completely closed down roads.
Yeah, that ice storm a few years ago that knocked out so much power that you couldn't possibly use a theater.
Epidemic, pandemic, which is obviously COVID. Interruption or delay of transportation services. That would, again, have to be like a widespread interruption or delay. Acts of God is strange to us now in a mostly secular world, but it just means that it's acts from above. Anything that just happens.
Really random stuff. An airplane crashes into the theater.
Yeah, something that you could not possibly predict. Again, a tsunami might be considered in that. This language is supposed to be anything that we couldn't have thought of that is not the fault of either party. Again, this is something that it's important to see, one, whether it is one way or mutual, as a lot of venues will have a one-way force majeure so that they can keep the deposits. And then also, force majeure clauses should have what you do if it happens. So how do you go about deciding how we're going to deal with this? So that can be a delay in payment, a delay in performance. It can be a termination. It can be like, there can be a whole lot of things. I tried to write this in a way that was assuming that you would be able to work together with somebody, but also that if it cannot be, then it's terminated on the date of the force majeure. So basically, if people are being assholes about it, then it's done. And again, you're trying in a contract to anticipate every outcome so that you don't have to argue, and so that emotions don't come into it. So the rest of it is actually fairly, I know it's long, 10 pages, but it's generally pretty self-explanatory. So if you have any specific questions about anything within this, then I encourage you to ask about it. I can explain it because I wrote it, but if there's any specific advice you want, again, on a legal issue that you have, I can give my personal advice, but I cannot give legal advice. So we will now move on to budgets.
Yay, budgets. Okay, so this is what we started to do in the last one, and we're going to do a more in-depth thing today. So first off, again, this is all for indie producing. So we're going to be doing a sample budget for a relatively small production, and we're going to be assigning some numbers to things that are not ideal in a way to try and be realistic. So in an ideal world, of course, all of us, whether we're doing an equity contract or not, are paying people still equity amounts. I think we all know that doesn't happen very much in indie theater. That doesn't mean that we can't, that we shouldn't be still trying to find a way to pay everyone who's involved for all of their hard work. But it does mean we're going to be working with some lower numbers. Let's see here. Okay. So Connor has made up a little budget. You can download this again from the TITC.ca/resources. This here is our top sheet. This is locked. So this is all going to be filled in by formulas and is just your little summary to look at afterwards. Going down to the bottom here, you can see where our different sheets are, and so the different tabs are called. We have our budget, which goes through all the different things that you could possibly think of. I have a note here to only fill in certain categories. So you want to fill in the number categories, the X there, and the dollar. Don't touch these ones because those are done with formulas. You can change some of this too. We'll get to that in a minute. Then we'll go over our revenue projection. Again, here is a note, only fill in these yellow boxes because we have made a little template that will use the formulas and give you some general ideas of what kind of money you can expect to get from things. And then our expenses category, where the main thing to notice here is that in the category, it's a drop down. So you just click on that, you'll see this little box come up here, and then you can see all of the different things that come up in our budget. And it's important you use those, otherwise the formulas won't work and it won't fill in things properly. And then this stuff you just type in yourself. And then our revenue page, which is really basic. You just fill in these and it will total it for you. Okay, so I'm gonna let Connor go over in a bit more detail how this budget is set up and how you would fill things out. And then I'm gonna start giving him examples and we will make a rough budget, and you will see how it's a lot of going back and forth. I'm gonna do this off the top of my head, the same way I would do the first time I would sit down and be like, I want to do a show. Let's see if we can do it.
So when you look at how this is laid out, you have everything in its own column. So I've numbered everything so that it's easily referenced. These can be, I wouldn't change the numbering, but you can easily delete any part of it. But we'll look at that later. These categories, you should not ever change. What's written in column B, which is what the title of the role is, they shouldn't be changed because they are linked to the formulas. But otherwise, everything in column C can be changed. So generally, what I would expect is that I would write in a name where it says writer, dramaturge, producer one, those sorts of things. That would be a person to put a face to it so you know exactly who you're talking about, and to track that. And you might have multiple writers, and you might have, so you can really easily track exactly what you want to do. Column D is a notes column. So that's just where you can put in anything that helps you understand where you're getting your numbers, how you're determining the numbers, and and anything else that might be relevant to you. That's really for you. Again, this is all for you as a producer. This is your own tracking. This isn't like official accounting documentation or anything like that. So this can really be whatever makes it easiest for you to understand and quickly plan and know what you're getting yourself into. So now you have these three columns, which are the ones you're going to be using the most. So you see number, X, and dollars. So number is the number of items you have. So when you're talking about people, that feels a little weird, but it is still, if you have 2 stage managers and you don't want to list them individually, you can put in 2. But column E relates directly to column C, the number of that thing there are. X in column F is some sort of multiplier. So it can be a very wide range of things, but you most commonly see it in when you're talking about things. So for example, if I had
Well, it can be with rate of pay
can be
too.
rates.
So why don't we say we have a state? Let's put an example in. So let's go to our stage manager, and we have one stage manager. So we put 1 in the number column. Say our stage manager is getting paid $100 a show, and we are going to do 8 shows.
Right. So then we have 8 shows, modifier, right? They're getting paid 8 times. So I guess that is probably the best way to generally describe X is if E relates to C, then F relates to G.
Yeah, the X is how many times.
How many
the
times?
thing is the times symbol. It's how many times something.
A payment happens.
Yeah.
So if you're paying them $100 a show, then it's there, and it automatically calculates everything, and you're paying them $800.
Yeah.
So subtotal will automatically add up, and total will automatically add up, and then we get into spend and variance on this sheet. So spend, we go back to the expenses page. Do you want to get into
Sure, a little bit. So if we're going to say we've paid our stage manager now for one show, we paid them 1 in advance. So we go into the category.
There's a drop-down menu.
And we'll find stage manager.
Stage manager.
Item, we can say performance 1 payment. In this case, the vendor would be the stage manager, so Joe Smith. Let's just make these bigger quickly. You just double click on the little line in between. We'll make it as large as the thing that's in it. So description, we've already kind of got the item. We can say April 1st performance, right? And it's just whatever helps you remember. Then our subtotal is $100.
Let's say no tax.
Let's say no tax for this one right now.
So now it says he's been paid $100. So if we go back to our budget, you see $100 gets put into the spend category for stage manager, and we still have $700 left in our budget to spend on stage manager.
And if you want to just scroll down to the bottom to show them how that adds up.
And then you see that our total for production labor is $800, $100, $700, and if we go all the way down to the grand total, it becomes $880 because we have an automatic contingency of $80 in case something else comes up. And again, the spend and variance are calculated accordingly.
So let's stay there for a second and just go over contingency. So your contingency is your oh shit fund, basically. It's something you want to, if you possibly can, put into your budget so that if something comes up that is outside of what you planned for, you don't have to go and start pulling from other parts of the budget or be faced with cutting something essential or something you should never do, but people do, going over budget. A general guide for it is 10% is great. You could change this just by clicking in here and changing it to 5%. Oh, I did 2 things.
Yeah, just write
5.
Yeah.
And you see that automatically changes the numbers here. No. But ideally aim for 10%. Contingency is not something that you plan on spending. So you don't go into it being like, oh, we're going to buy all of the cast gifts out of our contingency. That $80 there, or whatever it ends up being, is meant to be for unexpected things. Hopefully at the end of this, you will be on or under budget and you will not have spent that contingency. Though, of course, when we're doing small productions too, sometimes you feel it's so tight you can't put that in, but that just means you have to be extra careful with your spending. Okay, so should we start going through one? Yeah. Does anyone have any questions right now about this template? We're not going to go into how to build one of these, but Connor can tell you some of the shortcut things and basically what it's doing. Otherwise, I'll just start going into an example. Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Connor loves making these things. Like, I thought I liked Excel, and then I met him, and he's like this is his fun Friday night. So, okay, so let's do an example. Let's say, well, should I just do it for Lifeboat? Okay.
Sure.
There is a show that I'm hoping to produce sometime next year through Bygone. So it's top secret. Now I'm putting it here. But here's a play that I want to do. It's something that I'm going to be writing an adaptation of. So
I'm just doing something so we don't just lose the template.
Okay. Example. Beautiful. We can upload this after as well.
It's already uploaded, and if you open up, we don't have that.
No, we did it different. I'm going to add it after.
Okay.
Yeah. So after this, we'll save this example one too, if you want to see some of the specific numbers. Okay. So some of this will be messy because this is literally like the first time I'm doing it for this, but I thought it might be helpful to see where it comes from. So every time I was taught anything about budgets, it's people who like know their stuff so well, and you think, how did they figure that out? So we're just going to figure it out together. Okay, so I want to do this show. I don't know yet what venue. If I had a specific venue, I can put the venue capacity in there. For us, I know it's a small production, and I'm hoping for about 100-person capacity.
And do you want to talk about how we would
figure that out?
Finding a venue?
Sure. Okay. So
one of the first conversations we always have is what would be a great venue to fit this production. So Lifeboat is a show in which you have a group of people who are literally in a lifeboat. Yeah. That's it. The set is a lifeboat on water.
Yeah.
So we don't need a huge amount of playing space.
No.
But we do need enough to still be interesting and to have, and our biggest consideration is that we need
tech.
We need a full lighting grid. We need to be able to move that around, and we need good sound.
Yeah. So things you want to consider when you're thinking of your venue are, what sort of tech elements do you need? Do you need a full lighting thing? If you don't, there's less than there used to be, but there are still storefront theaters in Toronto that will have a very basic lighting setup. But because of that, they'll be cheaper. You have to think about sound. Do you need something that's already got all this great sound system set up? Is it something where you can rent that's an extra cost, but is it something where you can easily set up sound? Is the venue accessible, both for your actors and the audience? That's an important thing because there has been a push for accessibility in terms of audience members, but a lot of theaters are still not actually accessible for the actors. So that's something you need to know going in. Can they get to the green room? Can they get on the stage? Location of the theater. There are some theaters that could be great, but they're in kind of sketchy parts of town. And depending on your audience, that could be a deterrent. We tend to put on shows that get older people. They're not going to go to like kind of a gritty looking storefront. But if you're doing something for a bunch of young artists, that might not matter.
Being on the TTC line.
Yeah, think about accessibility in terms of that, like how quickly can they get somewhere? You can definitely get some cheaper things if you go up into North York, but some people are not willing to go that far. So you have to think about all of those things and kind of balance it.
And I'll say one of the reasons that we tend to start with a venue as soon as we have a show thought up is, and sometimes before sometimes we figure out a show that we want to put in a venue, is because it's almost definitely going to be your single largest expense.
Yes.
It may not be the biggest portion of your budget as
out of the different categories.
Right. You might spend more on people than that, but no person is going to be paid as much as your venue in independent theater.
Yeah.
Because venues in Toronto range from probably about 2,000, 2,500 a week.
Yeah.
To, 30 to 50.
Yeah, I think out of the ones that we would be looking at, that like
up to about 6,000.
Well, okay, and don't quote me on this because I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but a few years ago, Hart House cost 10 grand a week. Yeah. So right, that's probably like the biggest kind of theater you're looking at, something with like 500 seats. When you're looking at stuff like Alumni was what, 2,500 a week.
So then the next question is, how do we find that out?
Yeah.
So why don't we?
So Google is your friend. That's the answer to all of these. When you're like, where did this number come from? We Googled it. Most theaters will have a spot on their website that tells you exactly what the things cost. You can also write to them and ask them. If you're finding you can't get information, maybe not as much with venues, but you want to figure out what lighting is going to cost and you have no idea where to start, Facebook has some great groups. Production Resources Toronto on there. You need to be specific and you need to make sure you're not wasting people's time. It's a lot of professionals who can be like a little snippy, but it's a great resource of people. They're very helpful. So ask around. And that's part of the point of the TITC, is not to just do these, but to have in our group come right out and say, what did you spend on this thing? How did you get this for this price? And have people explain that and share not just their knowledge and resources, but also like the actual things. We have, as a company that does vintage shows, we have a basement that is full of old props and costumes. So we are going to have different prices for some of those than other people will have. And through the TITC, we can share all that so everybody can have access to the lower price things. That's a little bit of a tangent. So let's go back to our ticket revenue projections.
So what's the venue that we decided would probably be the best for Lifeboat?
The Young Center.
The Young Center in their Tank House Theater.
Yeah.
So if we look up on Google for the Tank House Theater.
And this is where Soul Pepper is, if anyone's not familiar with the title, is in the distillery there. They've got 3 theaters in that space, right? Their main one, and then a couple smaller ones. So we're talking about one of the smaller ones there. Reasons for this, we can get that type of space other places, but we thought about the distillery, and they've got lots of foot traffic, more than you would get at something like, say, Tarragon, which is in kind of a residential area. It's got this sort of cool vibe, and Soul Pepper puts on shows that are similar themes to the stuff we like. So we thought if they do well there, then that probably means there are people there who like those types of shows and would like to come and see us. And also kind of back to what I was saying with, like what types of places your audience will want to go to. This is a little higher end while still being within our budget. Yep. Something we tried to do with our last big show was we did it at Theatre Passe Muraille, and that was mostly because we needed the second level that they had built in, but also we knew that if we were going into a more established theater, then that would catch the eye of more people, and that worked. It cost us a lot more money, but it did have we did have an easier time getting press. We did have more ticket sales. We did have more people that didn't know someone in the show, like more just random audience members coming. So those are all things to consider, but of course there's costs associated.
So when I Google the Tank House Theater, immediately it comes up with how many seats are in it. It is configurable up to 110 patrons.
So let's say, we'll say 110, because then we're going to take out some of this here. Now, sometimes a venue will have a rule that you have to leave some for volunteers, or you may want to leave some for volunteers. That's usually 2 seats. Reserved for accessibility. If you're in a theater that's got movable seats, there may be a section where if someone comes in a wheelchair, they have to take out 5 seats. I think it's actually usually more like 4, so we could do that. And then you want to think of how many shows are in your run. I'd said 8 before, but that's super small. Let's do 16.
16 would be like a 3-week run.
Let's say a 3-week run, because that would be our ideal. We've ended up doing
16.
Usually 11
you can do
performances.
Up to 19 in 3 weeks if you do Tuesday to Saturday.
That's intense. Let's try 16. Let's say that this is sort of an ideal thing for a small group. We want to have a 3-week run, not every single day. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now we know that our projections are going to be based, oops, I shouldn't have double clicked. They're going to be based off 104 seats. Now, before we get into per performance, before we get into all of this stuff, I'm going to point out this is based off of capacity, but you need to keep in mind the size of your venue. So this works best if you've got a venue of around 100, between maybe 90 and 120 seats. If for some reason you are in a 600 person venue, don't expect that, oh yeah, I can sell 30% of that. That can be a huge number. On the other end of that, if you're doing a site specific thing and you can only fit 20 people in there, you better be selling out every day, or you're not going to be able to possibly afford it. So the rule of going off of 30% of your venue is, it's not really a rule. It's a suggestion that only works with certain size venues, but that's what we're going to use for today. So the first thing we have to do is figure out what our ticket prices are going to be. We've got general tickets, general admission, students, senior arts workers, and discount code or equity prices. So I think a good general price today for an indie show is usually about $30. There is a lot that goes into how you decide what to charge. But the main thing you want to be thinking about is, what are other comparable people charging? Both companies your size. Look at the venue and see what they usually charge for tickets. If we are in a more established venue like this and their general is 40, I still wouldn't charge quite that much, but it does mean that we can charge a little bit more because people are used to paying that much to be there. If you were doing this in a dirty old bar, don't expect people to pay $40 to come in. Yeah, so look at your comparables, and then of course when you're doing your budget, sometimes, like I usually start sort of with some revenue projections and then fill in the budget and go back and forth. Sometimes you look at it and go, oh, if I up the ticket price by $2, I can do this. You know, so you've got to play with it. This is just a start. We're going to say $30. So students are usually a few dollars less than that. Let's say 25. Senior arts worker.
We usually have the same as students.
Yeah, we usually do the same. Now, discount code and equity. What we've found has worked well for us in the past is doing an early bird discount, because when you're getting to about a month before the show and you've spent a ton of money and none has come back yet, it's really reassuring to see some early ticket sales. We usually do like a 20 or 25% discount on that. The reason I mentioned equity is equity has a rule that if
you're using equity people.
No, not even if you're using them. This is just if you want to advertise through equity through the eDrive, you need to have a discount code for equity members that is a minimum of 20% lower than your general admission. So we often use that as a guide. So what's 20%? 24?
20, yeah, it's $6.
It's $6 off, so that means $24 is our discount code there. The lowest I've ever offered discount codes for, I think, is $15. We've given out a handful of those. Sometimes with our actors, they ask for comps for people, and depending on the size of the cost of the show, like that'll determine how many we can give. Personally, for Bygone, we always tell our actors they can have 2 comps for opening night for whoever they want, and then we give them a discount code so that for some friends and family they can do cheaper ones. It's up to you. Figure out what works. You can also, we don't go into this here, but if you're doing a show that could possibly have group sales like students or something, we tend to charge less for that. Usually we charge $15 a student, but we're selling in groups of 30, so it still ends up being worth it. You have to kind of go back and forth.
We don't usually budget for those.
No, I never budget for those.
Are extras. If you do that, then those should be in the positives.
Yeah, and we do that because it's quite difficult to get student shows to come out. Established theaters already have a bit of a monopoly on that. If you're doing youth shows, obviously that's a little different, but make sure that you've got some guarantees with that before you start doing this stuff, because we have had some student groups out, but I've also had ones where the teacher's been like, I really want to bring them, and it's like a week and a half before, and then they're like, we can't make it work. So you don't want to rely on that if you don't have that guarantee before. So we're going to stay out of that for now.
And the next thing is,
yeah, so ticket fees. So a common thing we see now are ticket fees. If you're using something like Simple Tix, brown paper tickets, what have you. Don't use brown paper tickets.
They're being sued.
Yeah. We use Simple Tix is my favorite. It's really easy to set up. They have very low fees. You can track a lot of stuff. I think they had some analytics was what got us interested in that.
You can use it with Square if you want to invest. It's not that expensive to get.
It's like $60
readers.
Yeah.
People are way more willing if they can use their credit card or debit card to buy a ticket. Nobody carries cash anymore. So.
No, yeah, the idea of cash only at the door is dangerous, especially if you are dealing with people that aren't right in the artist community. I think a lot of us do rely on cash more and don't necessarily have credit cards, but the average audience member wants to just tap and go.
Simple
So
things already.
simple ticks. Okay. Simple ticks. And Connor's going to write it here in the group chat. Again, there's lots of different ones, and that's another thing that I would suggest maybe going and talking to people on like production resources or something and say, hey, what have you used? What have you found was good? Connor's just sending the link to that there. But this is the one we've been using for the past few years, and it's my favorite. Okay, so back to our budget. So we've got two different rows here, ticket fee that we keep and ticket fee third party. So we don't tend to put on ticket fees. I kind of hate them, but they're so common now that it might be a good way to do things. You could decide that you're going to add $1 to every ticket, and that's going to cover the cost of your Square reader. It's going to go towards the person who's manning your ticket sales, what have you. We personally don't tend to put ticket fees that we keep. Third-party ticket fees are things that like Simple Ticks would take. I think, so you have to look at them. Sometimes it changes too, depending on if you're paying by PayPal versus credit card versus debit card. They can have different ones. Usually there's a flat fee of like $1 or something, and then a certain percentage of the ticket amount too, which I think is usually around 3%. Read the fine print, it will go through all of that. Let's just say that each of these have a flat $1 on top of it. So we now see that our advertised price, $31.26.26. You can, of course, to advertise your base price and then at checkout have your ticket fees. It's just a personal preference. I like being upfront, but I think it's more common to do it the other way, really. A lot of companies will advertise the lower price and you go through, and I think people are more accustomed to that now, so you can get away with that. So then our profit per ticket is just the advertised price minus the third party. And so there, in this case, we're just back to our base ticket price.
Yeah. And the projections of percentage sold. I have a very conservative projection in there, which only has 20% general tickets sold. We find that we're actually higher than that. We're more like 40%.
No, it's usually about 30. Wait, are you talking about?
How many of our tickets are general price?
Oh,
Price.
yeah, it's near 40%, I think, generally.
So that will obviously greatly affect how much money you end up making. So if we say put this to 40% and this down to 20%, making sure that this always equals 100%, then we make more money. Yeah,
and just to clarify, so this is the projected, the amount of this kind of ticket, how many of your total ticket sales of the 100% are from each type of ticket. So this is assuming that 40% of our tickets sold will be the general admission and 20% will be the student and 20% will. And this is actually pretty close to, I would say our discount code is actually usually a little less than that, but still you can play with those numbers. As Connor said, keep them low, like keep the higher one. Yeah. Okay, so once you have that set up, we can look at the number of tickets sold by capacity, single performance. So if we sold 20% of the house, that's a total of 21 tickets. 30%, 31 tickets. It's pretty easy when we're looking at numbers like this. I like to have that pulled out separately to give yourself an idea of what it's actually going to look like in the venue. Yeah, I find it helpful to know, like, okay, if we're doing this, it's literally only 20 people in a space. That's not very many. And to try and think of like, well, how full do I usually see theaters? Like some of it is some kind of guesswork like that. Then we go into gross ticket sales value by capacity for a single performance. So now we're looking at the money related to this part here. So if we only sold 20% of the entire house, which is the 21 tickets, and if the numbers, the general tickets, that's not off of that. What?
So this is, if you sell 21 tickets at the general price, then you make $650.
Oh, it's for the overall one. Okay.
Yeah. So that's and again, you have then 30% capacity at general price is that much per performance, and so on. So these are at 100% ticket sales in each category.
Yeah.
Just so you know, like best case scenario, everything is general priced, right?
Yeah.
And you make, if you sell out everything at general price, then you're making $3,000 per performance.
Yeah.
Versus
if you are only selling your discount code and you're at 20%, you're making $500 per performance. Again, this is just kind of give you some ideas of where you're at. It's good to look at different possible outcomes. Why is this not going over to there now? Okay. Then the one that is the most important here is the gross revenue based on capacity and ticket type for the full run. So this is going to be for the 16 shows in the run. Looking at, this is again based on 100%.
Yeah, each of those lines.
Each of those lines is off 100%.
And then you have the projection there.
And that's based off this.
And that's based on the weighted average.
Okay. He's changed this and made it more comprehensive than what we usually use, because I do a lot of guesswork just based off of what I know my company sells. That's why I seem like I don't know what I'm doing. So, okay, so here, similar to here, but now we're looking at for the full run, so if it's 16 performances, we're saying if for the entire run, every day we sold 20% of the audience, and we sold them at general admission, 10,416, that's looking at how much money we'd be making. And it breaks down, it shows you all these different examples. These are fun things to show people if you're doing a profit share, to both give them a realistic idea of what they could make and to encourage people. Still, the number one way to sell tickets is word of mouth. If you have a cast and crew that's not talking about your show and making it sound exciting, your show is not going to do well, because in indie theater especially, it's mostly people we know. So if you're doing a profit share, fill this all out, bring this to your rehearsal and say, guys, look how much money we could make if we can just sell out 50% of every house. That means each of you have to bring out however many people to see it, right? That's why it's important to break this down, not just for you for budgeting, but to make sure people understand how difficult it can be and how profitable it could be. So then we have our projection. That's based off of this, correct? So the projection is now looking at whatever capacity, so 20%, let's look at 30% because that's what you usually base it off of. And looking at if you sold 30% of the house with this kind of breakdown. So the 40% of general tickets, 20% being student, et cetera, right? So that's saying there, then our total ticket revenue projection, 13,789. Again, I have a note there based on 30% house. This is just an estimate, okay? That's still a lot of money. And it depends on so many things, your time of year, your venue, how good your show is, a billion things. But you need to start somewhere when you're trying to make a budget. So this is where we always start. We start with saying, what is a reasonable ticket price? How long do we want to do this show? What's the venue we want to be in? What do we think we could sell? Okay, let's try and do a show that costs no more than $13,000. Now, as we go into the budget here, keep in mind that sometimes I'm going to, for sake of ease, put in actual fees for each of the actors. More often, you're probably doing a profit share. If you were doing a profit share, you can't just take this number and say, that's how much I have to spend, because that's how much you realistically could be earning. And if you're planning to spend every cent that you think you're going to get back in profit, you're planning to not actually have any profit, and then you don't have a profit share, and that's not cool. That's not a fair thing to do. So if you were trying to do a profit share, that's another thing you'd need to consider and say, well, how much do I want to pay these people? And make sure that you sort of subtract that amount before you make your budget. But to keep it easy, we're just going to say that we're actually paying people something. So now we're going to go back into our budget template here.
So we've chosen the venue, so that's probably the first place to start, because as we said, that's the biggest expense. So once we know that, then we know how much we have left to work with.
Yeah.
So we already said we're going to have one venue.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
number
One
is,
down.
sorry, is 1.
And then we were doing it for 3 weeks. And now I'll tell you how I got this number, but I looked up online what the Young Center charges. They have their rates posted online on their rentals page. You have to go to the Young Center, not Soul Pepper. I then emailed their the person in charge of booking, and I asked if there were any discounts for nonprofit companies or small independent companies.
Yeah, always
She
ask the
said-
big companies that.
She said yes, and then gave me the price over email, and that price is $2,920 per week. So all of a sudden, we're already at almost $9,000 out of $13,000, which means you have $4,000 to put on a show.
Yeah.
And that's why it's hard to do independent theater.
Yeah. What we often end up doing is planning this out and then doing fewer performances, because it doesn't always bring you more money to do more shows. That's another thing you have to kind of balance out. We'll maybe get into that in a bit. But for now, let's just try and fill in our budget. So we've got our venue amount. Let's say I want to make a note here, and this is Young Center. Why am I writing with an S? Young Center
Tank House.
so that we remember what it is. Again, if you want to be able to see your thing, you just do a double click on these lines in between. It will fill up the space. So outside of the cost of the venue itself, there will be a cost for house technicians. Most companies have 40 hours of tech built into the cost of their thing, but that is for a single technician. So make sure that you know when you need extra techs. Generally, it's for things like sometimes for load-in, almost definitely for hanging lights. If there's overtime, there's all different things. They will break it down clearly for you. It's something that will be laid out in the contract, but make sure you look at that really closely and that you look at what kind of overtime costs there are too, because you can get overtime in things that doesn't feel like overtime to you because it's based off of what their working day is. So just make sure you're clear with that, because that can be an unexpected expense.
Bigger venues generally also work with IATSE, the union, and unions, when you're planning out your time in a space, you have to remember that they are required to have breaks every 5 hours of 1 hour. So you can break that up a number of different ways as you plan out your day. Usually they can work up to 12 hours a day, which is actually 11 hours because of the breaks, right? You can't actually work somebody more than 11 hours in a day. But that gets a lot more into like when you're actually planning and not into budgeting. Now, one thing that the Young Center provides is 44 hours of time with their technician. So that is usually a problem. Like theater productions are heavily front loaded in terms of time, because when we're actually performing, you're only going to need somebody for like 30 hours to be there for the 4 hours that you're in the theater every day. But load-in days, you're going to be stretching that. Yeah. Like that first week, you have to schedule efficiently and to try to meet that. But you may still have some overtime.
That's a reason too. And I'm going to preface, I'm not saying to try and take advantage of anyone, but aside from being a good person, a reason it's important to get to know your techs and the people who run there and to be really kind to them and respectful of their time is a lot of them are really understanding people who have done some indie work. And there have been plenty of times we've tried to plan something, and because we have a good relationship with the technicians, they've helped us figure out how to be like, well, okay, book me for just this many hours here, and then you avoid the lunch break, and you know how to fit things in so that it's most beneficial for you. If you go in just trying to do that, you might piss somebody off, but be kind, be respectful of their time, ask for their advice. Every theater you go to, their techs there are so experienced, they're probably more experienced than you are. Take advantage of that and like in a good way. So with our house technicians, let's assume we only have to pay for one, that's the minimum. and that you're going to have to pay them. I guess it'd be and here we do an hourly rate. I think a pretty standard one is $25 an hour. I've seen it between, huh? What?
That should be here in the dollars.
Here.
Hourly.
Oh
rate.
yes, sorry, I was thinking of the hours. So in the dollars thing, that's our rate. I think I've seen as low as 22. You don't tend to see more than 25 for general techs, but sometimes they'll say you need an extra head technician. Again, look at your contract. And then number of hours, let's assume we only need them for load in and hanging lights, so probably 8 hours, because load in, you'll need them for a couple hours, and then hanging lights, probably 6.
So this is above the 44 hours that are included in your rental fee.
Yeah. So you see this number is rapidly climbing. HST, we will do, is this venue price before HST?
Well, so good to know. You may be a nonprofit, or you may be partnering with a nonprofit theater company. When you are a incorporated nonprofit, you don't have to pay HST. Or if you are, if the company you're renting from is a nonprofit or a charity, then they don't charge HST. In this case, I don't believe that they charge HST.
Yeah.
But you have to be wary of that, because that's an additional 13% that you have to pay.
Yeah, which is a big thing. HST, as a general note, is something that's on services and labor. So you'll find that a lot of the people you work with, especially like your techs, they're likely to charge HST because they probably work mostly as independent contractors. Some actors might charge HST. These are all things you need to figure out at the beginning, have outlined in your contract, and make sure you adjust your budget accordingly. If you're doing an equity contract, stage managers will have to be paid as employees, and they'll have HST, and they'll have other like CPP and EI things you have to take off and everything, but we're not going to go into all the equity stuff. You can talk to equity for that, but just sort of general things to keep in mind.
We were originally thinking this would be done in 3 minutes. I just wanted to.
At 3:30. Is this helpful to people? Do you want, should we keep going through and doing an example like this? I know we've talked a lot. Okay, cool. We'll keep doing it. I don't mind. I need to make my budget anyway. All right. So we've got our venue, HST, other costs. We'll leave that out for now because this is really early planning stages. But you could have in the venue other costs like front of house. Sometimes they let you do it all by yourself and you can bring in volunteers, which is great. Sometimes you have to pay for their front of house people. Sometimes their front of house people are included on certain days, but if you want to do a day that they're usually dark, like a Monday, or some theaters a Tuesday, then you have to pay an additional fee. So again, this is why you have to really go through your contract carefully, figure all that stuff out, and those are the things that will help you decide if it's worth having a show on a certain day or not. Again, it's usually Mondays are dark basically everywhere, but sometimes this happens with Sundays and Tuesdays as well. Okay, so then we have to look at our set. So I know that for this set, I just need a lifeboat. It's something that'll have to be constructed though, which isn't cheap. I'm thinking of the stuff we have. We personally own a ton of flats and a ton of furniture pieces, none of which are useful for this show. So while in most of our shows, I put our set budget quite low because I know what inventory I have, in this, I know that I'm going to need the stuff to make a 1940s style lifeboat. So construction you have as the raw materials, like the wood and stuff is where you have that. So I'll just write wood for lifeboat. For the sake of this budget, we're going to just sort of do a lump sum thing.
Honestly, for these sorts of things, when you're looking at sets, props, costumes, I think when you're budgeting, it's not very helpful to go into a really detailed thing. Like when you're itemizing things, that's not a useful way to do it. So you do what you call allowances, which are just saying like, this will cost you know, like I know that I need, you know, 2 sheets of plywood and 50 2x4s. And I know that 2x4s are approximately $2 to $3. So let's say that that's $150 for 2x4s, and it's $50 for 2 sheets of plywood. I think that's too small.
Oh, it's way too small. I would say the wood we would need for this, if we were doing an actual wood, and this is a thing, again, we can come back to, but things you can change are like right now I'm saying, okay, let's build it out of wood and make it look really authentic. If we come back and after we fill all this out and it's way too high and say, okay, well, what if I do it out of styrofoam? What if I do it with paper mache or something, right? And you start adjusting some of those things, keeping in mind that sometimes that will change your labor cost. Personally, when we do shows, I do a lot of it myself. So I really undervalue my labor. Negotiate with the director. Well,
Right now we're in the planning stage.
yeah.
So what you want to do is plan out in your, at your, as the producer, what you think things will cost. When you start bringing your team on, your director and your designers, then you should talk to them about what their needs are and what you feel can be done.
Yeah.
So then you might be like, this budget that you're making should be revised as you go. So
Yeah.
if you talk to the director and it's like, that thing that you had thought and budgeted on just won't possibly work, then you're going to have to go back and discuss with the director and see what's actually needed and see where you can revise it. And revising a budget means taking it out of one place and putting it in another.
Yeah. The only part of a budget that you should ever think of as being set in stone is that final number of this is the most I can spend, which is based off of how much money you think you can get, which goes back to your profit projection. If you know you've got donors, grants, whatever kind of stuff, you figure out this is the most money I can possibly spend, and I know I can make that money back or earn it beforehand by doing whatever. That stays the same. The rest of this will be changing probably right up until opening.
I try to set a date of the start of rehearsals for the budget being set, so that you know like where you're allocating money. You may still move stuff around during the rehearsal process as you're buying more things, but if you're going into rehearsals and you have, that means you have all of your people in place, you know everything, you've negotiated rates, you've negotiated all that. If you are still like, oh, I don't know, that's going to affect how you move forward. Like everybody's going to be a little bit like, oh, well, can I do this? Can I do that? And you have to be making decisions at that point. Yeah.
As someone who's worked as a designer, it's super stressful to have your producer be like, you know, you go to them and say, what's my budget? And they go, oh, I don't know, what do you need? Just like make it happen. You might think that that's being like helpful and encouraging. It's not. It's terrible. It's so terrible, and it puts so much stress on your designer. So don't do that. Producer is in charge of the money. You need to figure your stuff out. And to figure that out, you may be talking to your designer. But once you figure it out and say, this is your budget, like give them a hard number. So, so for going back to here, our construction, saying wood for lifeboat, we'll just put 1 as our thing. We're going to put 1 as a single cost because we're just lumping this all in.
When you're putting in allowances, which is a lump sum for a category, you put 1 and 1 in number.
I'm going to say we probably need about $600 for material. So I'm thinking of stuff like the wood, glue, paint, things to make it feel comfortable, safe, all sorts of materials. Dressing is separate from props in that like props are things you might actually use, like an actor picks up a cup. Set dressing can be things like we want it to look like there's water. We want there to be a big crate that's in the lifeboat that's stationary. For our shows, generally, again, I have a really low budget for that because I know we have a lot of things.
We also put in the time and labor to look at things like Emily looks at auctions, local auctions every single day.
Yes, literally every day of the year.
We go to antique shops. We have
good relationships with people who run antique things, people who work in theater, film, and television, who have access to different types of
Value
things.
Village is amazing.
Yes.
You can get so much, especially if you're a little bit crafty or have a designer who's a little bit crafty. You can cut this down a lot.
Yeah. And Value Village is great too, because you can get a little punch card and you can end up saving up to 30% off.
We're getting a little bit into design.
Yeah, I'm going to do a thing on design at some point too. But anyway, just to say that where these numbers are coming from is my personal experience as a designer. So if you're trying to put this together and you've never designed anything in your life, and you need to come up with some numbers, talk to designers, think about what kind of thing you'd want to do, and go on sites like the Home Depot and Canadian Tire and actually look at costs. That's where these numbers come from. So for dressing, let's say $200. Then we have our construction labor. So
I don't know if it's evident, but neither of us can construct. So we do need
I can do designs. I have constructed things, but I definitely have friends who are much faster and better at building things. So this is where we're going to start getting into numbers that like make me a little bit sad, because I will say honestly right now, this is really kind of undervaluing people, which is something that happens in indie theater and is why you need to make sure that you're giving something back more than just money. A thing that seems to happen a lot is a company decides, oh, we're going to pay this person. Okay, we're going to pay you $100, and you feel good because you're giving someone money and you're not asking them to do something for free. But then you forget about what that money, like how that's really valued, and you start taking advantage of people. So whether you're paying somebody or not, make sure you're thinking about how much they're really giving to you in terms of their time and experience, and how you can give the same or ideally more back to them. So here I'm going to say, I know that I've got friends who would help me build this for $150 flat.
Yeah. And when you're doing some sort of flat rate that is not like a market rate, that you're not like considering I'm hiring this person, I would call it an honorarium.
Yes.
So what an honorarium is you're giving money in as a thank you. Because basically what you have to recognize when you're not paying somebody their actual rate or their market rate, you are asking them to do you a favor at the start.
Yeah.
You're basically asking them to do it for free. Then what you're doing is saying, thank you, here's $150.
Yeah.
The $150 is not valuing them. You're not saying you're worth $150 for me. You're saying this is all I have and I thank you so much and here's some money.
Yeah.
It's a very different mindset going in. And by doing that, then you train yourself. It sounds so bad, but you have in your mind that people are doing you favors.
Yeah.
Which is what they're doing. And unfortunately, indie theater can't happen without the generosity of your friends, without being incredibly grateful for those people around you, and without asking for those things.
And make sure you're really transparent with that at the beginning. As if you're posting on a group like Production Resources Toronto, and you say paid position, and then say you're going to pay someone $100 for anything more than 2 hours of work, they will tear you down, and rightfully so. So again, just make sure you're clear from the beginning. Say when you're looking for people, hey, I can afford to pay this rate of, if it's anything less than $15 an hour, you're not actually paying them. You are giving them some kind of honorarium, which is fine. Make it clear and make sure that's not the only way you thank them. You tell them verbally, you're nice to them. You never pull anything like, I'm paying you, so you have to do. I've been told that so many times where it's like, I've literally worked 100 hours for you and you've paid me $100. Like, don't do that. Don't become one of those mean producers. Okay, so there's our thing. And you'll see this number is creeping up very, very quickly. So now we get to props. You can distinguish between rentals and purchases. That's just sort of for us tracking. We tend to buy as much stuff as we can because we reuse things because we do shows set in similar times. Also because I love antiques, and so it's a reason to do it. Sometimes it's cheaper to purchase things. It depends what you're using. The prop houses that exist in Toronto have some great stuff, but they're more aimed at film, so they can be quite expensive. But if you need a really odd specific thing, like a phone operator switchboard, I've seen those before. I wanted to buy one because I found one for $300, which is a great deal, but they're huge. They're like these big, tall, like the size of a phone booth. If you really need that, you probably don't want to buy it. So you go rent it. But if you need like some dishes, go to Value Village.
And the other thing that I'll mention when we're talking about props and set dressing as well, and sometimes even costumes, though it's a little weirder. If you know of a large theater, and I'm talking about the big ones, the Shaws, the Stratfords, even the Mirvishes, if you have an inn, I've never been able to get through to them.
Yeah.
But if you have any sort of connection, or if you just want to reach out to them during their off season, very important, when they're not busy, and say, I am doing this show and I need this weird thing that I don't have. I know, like, I know the Shaw prop guy, and he is so kind and so willing to help, and also Theater Aquarius in Hamilton. There's some of these people who are like, I have a warehouse full of stuff from our history, and we love to give back. And it's worth asking if there's something weird that you're just like, I don't know how I'm going to possibly afford.
Soul Pepper's another one. They have less stuff. They did get back to us. They no longer had the thing I wanted, but they're another one that was good for that. And we've managed to either rent things very cheap or in some cases get it for free. Often they want you to have insurance, but that's a thing we'll get into later anyway. And so, it can be a bit of a trek going out to Niagara from here, but you have to sort of balance like the quality of the thing you can get, the cost of driving out there with a truck versus trying to get it in Toronto. So something to keep in mind. So I've put in $250 for props because that's basically the number I budget for all props.
And I guess the caveat of all of these discussions that we're having about production and design is that I guess we're actually fortunate in that we have knowledge about how, not only how to budget it, but also how to do it. And we're willing to just like basically live our lives as a show.
Yeah.
But if you are just producing something and you have your designers in, those are just discussions you need to have. Like if they're coming to you and saying like, oh, you only gave me $700 for my costumes, and this is going to cost me $5,000. There's no way I can do it without $5,000. You have to say to them like, wait, why? Because I know that that if we plan this out, we can do it for cheaper.
Yeah.
And I want to know why you think that is. Yeah. And have that discussion. Don't just say no, you're out of your mind. Say why and try to compromise and negotiate that.
Yeah. As a producer, it's your job to kind of know how to do every single position there is. But that said, when you bring on somebody, also listen to their expertise. You should know something about set design, but your set designer should be better at it than you. And same with costumes and what have you. So I filled in a few other numbers here. Costumes, this is a super, super low estimate that I'm doing for ours because I know we have a lot of stuff and because we have ins with costumes. But I put a note here that there are 6 actors. The minimum that you want to have per actor, if you're doing anything that requires a specific look, is $100 per costume. Now, we do period shows, so it can cost more. You could be doing a show where they're wearing black jeans and a black t-shirt. Great. Maybe the actors have their own. If the actors,
you can find it at Value Village for $10 a pop.
Yeah.
Like there are different considerations.
But I would still plan on budgeting $100 a person, because then out of that can also come stuff like if they need their hair cut, if they need makeup for something, if they're wearing their own clothes and they get damaged and you want to replace them. If you have an actor using their own stuff, that should be put in their contract as well, or in a rider. That's laid out really specifically in equity things. In our contracts, I don't think it's in there, but it's just a thing to mention, mostly to be like, the actor is putting this in and this is what'll happen if it gets ruined, because we don't want people being like, sure, I'll wear my grandmother's wedding dress for this, and then it gets destroyed and they feel bad and you feel bad. So plan that stuff ahead of time. So I put $700 for costumes, which is a low estimate. Our shows, I usually do $800 to $900, which is still quite low. And that is because I know I have stuff. I know I can sew a bit. I know my mother can sew a lot. But the value of the stuff that we usually do is probably closer to about $2,000. So
more for some
it's
shows.
definitely more for some shows. So again, that's because we do period shows, but I'll go into that more on a design thing maybe.
Yeah.
So then we've got insurance, front row insurance. I'm going to write that here. Front row insurance is who we go with. They're great because they're the only insurance company around that deals specifically with theater. So there's sometimes maybe there's other ones you get something slightly cheaper, but their rates are good. They're really easy to work with. They understand the industry. Most venues that you rent will require insurance. They'll ask for $2 million in liability insurance, general liability, which sounds terrifying, but $2 million usually costs you about $260 for a few weeks.
And then the aspects of insurance that you need to know about. General liability is that insurance that covers like you burn the building down, or you damage the wall, or you do those sorts of things. That's what general liability is. It's the structure of the building. Specific liability insurance is a different thing. And front row, one of the best things about it is that it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to fill out their form, and they ask you every question. They guide you through, and it updates your total as you go. So if you're renting props and they require insurance, if you're renting costumes, they require insurance. If you're borrowing, like to do your archival film shoot, and you're borrowing camera equipment from somebody to set that up, you can put that in and you can say, I want it covered for $30,000, and it'll add another $50 or something like that.
It's worth doing.
It's just like it takes you step by step through that and asks you the questions about what you need insurance for. So you don't have to go in knowing all of these industry lingo for insurance, because it's just not worth getting into knowing what like insurance is a weird industry.
It's so complicated. If you don't need to know it, if you're just using it for these little one-off shows. If you're a company that produces regular shows, you can also get year-round insurance, which of course is like a larger amount, but usually works out to less overall. But for this, we're going to assume that you're just focused on this one-off.
Load and expenses would be something that often I think people forget about is you're going to have to likely rent a truck. Theater is just one of those things where you'll need at least a cargo van, if not a 16 or 24 foot truck.
Make sure you know someone who can drive that. They probably have to be over 25 to be able to rent it. They have to have they have to have a credit card to rent it. They will put a hold on your credit card, which means that
$500.
It can be expensive. So you have to have that money cleared, and it's not money they charge you as long as you return the truck. But those are things you need to plan ahead of time. You don't want to get there and be like, oh God, we can't actually rent this, and now our whole day is lost.
So without discounts, if you like, I always ask for a discount because in exchange for advertising, I'll try to plan ahead and get as much off of this as possible. But usually, like if you don't have that, if you're just renting it, it's $100 each way. So I would budget $200 for loading.
And then there's also gas.
Right.
And there's also, especially if you're not paying people to load in for you, feed them. Load in is terrible. If you're doing a big set, go to Tim's at least and get them some donuts and coffee and stuff. So I'm going to say $300 for load in to think of all the different.
Do 4 if you're thinking of all of them.
Well, that was initially what I was going to say. And then you had it so low, I didn't want to. There you go. Other production and design.
Show specific for this one, I don't think we'd have anything.
So we'll leave it. Now, look at this terrifying number. That's getting very, very close to our thing. And all we have is like the basic stuff that you see on the set. Back to costumes for a second. Understand, wouldn't the number be 6 because it's 6 actors? You could put it that way, but I upped it by another $100, knowing that someone might have a costume that costs a bit more. If you wanted to do it as specific as each actor is allocated a certain amount, then yes, do it that way and put in the number 6.
Yeah, you could do it either way. You could either go through and allocate towards actors. The thing that you might find though is that, for example, like we'll use our period pieces because I think it's more likely this way, but different like gendered roles, for example, have very different costs associated. Like if we're buying a vintage dress, sometimes we spend $200 or $300 on a vintage dress, but then a background male who needs a suit, we can go to Valley Village and find something for $20.
Yeah.
So we prefer to do that allowance method because it allows us within, or it gives your designer, either if you're the designer or helping with the designer, or it just gives your designer the flexibility within that number to allocate it as they need to.
Yeah.
Right? So a lead might need more than somebody who's a sporting, right? So it just.
Well, and if you're somebody who, as I do, goes to like auctions and stuff to get things, I've always been under budget with my costume stuff, and it's been low budgets because sometimes you find something that's just like phenomenal. So having that allowance as well, you know, sometimes I go and I'll buy a pair of pants and it's $200, and if it's somebody who doesn't understand how some of that budgeting stuff works, they might look at it and be like, you could have got him pants for $10, but I got the perfect period pants for that much because I know I just got 3 other people's costumes for $5 from an auction, right? So that's where it comes into trusting your designer, telling them, yes, you have to stay within this amount of money, but not nitpicking about where they spend that money, because a lot goes into that research. And it's really annoying. I'll tell you, as being hired as a designer, to have someone go through those things. So don't do that to them.
I think that, and briefly, that goes back to a point that we made in our first webinar, which was that a producer's job is oversight, you're not micromanaging,
Yeah.
right? So you're doing these to plan, so you know how to fundraise, how to progress and manage things. You're not doing this so you can say, if you spend over $100 on a costume, then I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to be over budget. That's not what it is.
Yeah. So for this, we're going to leave other productions and design.
So now I would generally go back up to the top, I think, and work our way down.
Okay, so rights. I'm writing this. It's based off of something that is public domain. We went into public domain and stuff with rights in our last webinar, so we'll leave that for now. But in this case, I'll just write Emily. Oops, where'd it go? I opened my something. Here we go. Emily Dix, writer, to just remember that it's me, and I'm not going to charge anything. So there's no cost in this. And again, here, writer, I can say that it's me. You expenses are for, like, say you hired someone to write something and you're paying them $500 to write the show. You might also say, you know, you can charge us for what your paper costs. For you're writing in a coffee shop, here's your coffee. It's just any of the things that's not specifically to the writer, but is related to the cost of writing. In this case, I'm not going to have any. Dramaturg, of course, is somebody who helps, like the writer and director, sort of understand things. You can be someone who helps develop a script. Again, we don't tend to use them. Writing expenses, in our case, there's not really anything for the script costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that is only, like we said before, that's not because that's what happens in indie theater. That's because we're willing to put in the elbow grease to make sure that can happen. Like, we put in the free labor.
Let's put in some money, because I'll show you how it's going to put us over budget and why I end up working for free. So let's pretend that I'm getting a $200 honorarium for the rights for the copyright. Show. Yeah, $200 for the copyright, but that's going to end up coming out. Okay, then we get into production labor. So here we see all these different people we could possibly hire. Producer, so I'm one of them. Oops, I can't type today. And Conor is one. What I sometimes do with some of these people, because we have so little money to pay them, is sometimes we do cover expenses more than actually them. And that's not by giving them money, but it's like, you know, every time we have a meeting with our stage manager or something, we buy them a coffee. When we're in rehearsals, I bring them. I feed the cast. Food goes a really long way. If you can't afford to pay everybody, a great thing to budget in is that you're going to spend $20 to $50 every rehearsal to bring people something. And don't just bring Timbits every time, you know, like find out what people like, see if you can bring something healthy. It really kind of boosts morale, and people who are fed are in a better mood.
That was actually the first ever film set I was on. I went up to the producer and I said, I want to be a producer. This is 6 years ago, I guess.
It's longer than that.
7,
8, yeah.
And I said, do you have any advice? And his first piece of advice was don't. And then I said, well, how did you get into it? And he said, well, for most producers, you get into film producing by having $5 million that you're willing to turn into $1 million. So all of a sudden you have an idea of what producing is. It's a thankless job but everything falls on you. Where I was going with this is that he said, the actual advice that I'd give you is keep people fed. He said, because if people are hungry, they will start noticing everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
And as good as we are, even the best producers in the world can't make everything perfect.
Yeah.
And as soon as people are hungry, they get grouchy and they will just notice every little thing that they could possibly do. And if you can stop that from happening, then it'll be a lot smoother and you'll be able to manage more effectively.
It saves time as well because you still have to give them food breaks, but if you have stuff people can eat there and they're not wandering off and getting distracted and everything, it's easier to stay on schedule. So it's like herding cats, right? So it's another thing to keep in mind. So I've filled in a few numbers here. Again, we actually never get paid for this, but I'm going to put some in just to show you for where we'll end up taking it out. Yeah. And these are very low, again, honorariums. They're not being paid because the number of hours we put into a show, I don't even want to think about. $100 would be nothing. So that's a thank you cost. Production manager, we don't tend to have one. Yeah, so we've got our stage manager. A producer
can take on a lot of the roles of a production manager in indie theater. It would be really if you have multiple producers, then usually, like Emily, she usually directs as well, but in her producer role is much more in the production management space, and mine is much more in the sitting on a computer doing finances space, which are two of the oversight positions.
Yeah, and your stage manager can take on some of that as well, but make sure that if that's something that's negotiated and agreed on at the beginning. Don't assume that an SM is going to do your production management stuff. So that means don't assume that they are going to deal with all of the techs, that they are going to figure out the tech week schedule, the venue, any of that. Their job is to be there, like in your rehearsal, to take blocking notes and make sure that the director is staying on schedule, to call the show, and that's about it. Stuff outside of that, make sure it's agreed on. It's especially important in equity things because it changes the rate of pay, but in anything. This show doesn't need a music director.
Are we staying at 800 for the stage? We have 16 shows, so that would be $50 a show.
Yes. So let's change that to 16 because that's the number of shows. And we actually usually pay closer to, if we're paying them for a show, more like $50 a show. Another way you can save some money if you have experience doing other things is we tend to take on stage managers who haven't stage managed before, which can be a little stressful, but I have stage management experience. I know that as a director, I always take the type of notes that a stage manager would take. So I know that even if I have a stage manager who shows up and has no idea what they're doing, it's not going to damage the show. So, but I like to have someone else call it. I have called our own shows too, my own shows, but preferably once the show opens, I don't have to keep doing that. So what we do sometimes is put out a call and say specifically, like unpaid, this is an honorarium, it's usually about $150. Maybe we'll do it as that for this.
But then we offer training.
Yeah.
And Emily will go.
And it needs to actually be training then too. You know, with our last big one, we did bring somebody on who had, I think she'd been an ASM on a Fringe show. The first hour in our Q2Q was kind of terrifying as she tried to figure out what she was doing, but then she caught on She made some great connections, and she's been doing a lot of stage management work since then. So be honest about what you're offering. If you say you're going to train them, train them. Don't just throw it at them and then get mad if they don't do it. You know, I talked her through how to do a prompt book. I was there with her for all the things. There were a lot of rehearsals she couldn't come to because of other commitments, and that was fine. That's something that wouldn't be fine if we were actually paying her and paying a real wage. But when you're offering $150 for a skilled job, manage your expectations. Okay, so I've changed that to the one-time payment of $150 because that's more often what we do. Don't need a music director. Don't need a choreographer. Intimacy directors are things that are coming up a lot now. So you would be good to get an intimacy director if you're doing, obviously, anything that has to do with like sex or anything really physical like that. Possibly with some fight scenes in addition to a fight director if you're doing something that feels really intimate. But it's something you should talk to your director and your actors about, because there can be things that, you know, maybe you think there's nothing intimate about this at all, and for whatever reason it really makes an actor uncomfortable.
It can also help with difficult subjects.
Yeah.
Like if your show deals with triggering topics or things that might be difficult to handle from a mental health perspective, then an intimacy director, just having somebody who is there, who is wholly mindful of that sort of how people interact with both each other and with the material. Because I know directors can tend toward, like, people get focused on their job and their art, and people can forget about the other things that happen along with that. So it can be really useful to have somebody who can just look at that. And it's not a position that you need there every day.
No, that's what I was going to say. What I would recommend, if you possibly can, is to maybe at your first blocking rehearsal, maybe even earlier than that, have someone come in, even for a short session, even if you don't think you have really sensitive things, to just be like, here's some general guidelines for how to deal with anything. Like stuff we've done has been like, you know, clapping in and out kind of stuff. And then if you have something that's like more intensive, you probably want to bring them in on the same kind of schedule you would a fight director. So probably like bring them in when you're first going over it, bring them in to check it again, bring them in the first time you were in the venue, and then maybe bring them in just before opening night. I'm going to leave that out for now. I don't think we need one. We'll need a fight director. I don't think we need an intimacy director, and I'm not totally sure what they charge right now because it's kind of a new thing. Siobhan Richardson is somebody I would recommend, knowing that I've worked with her as a fight director, and I know she's getting really into the intimacy director stuff.
I would say that Siobhan, she's been doing Canada-wide tours about intimacy directing. She's one who, even if
write that name down here.
Even if she's not available, she's an incredibly nice, incredibly helpful person who could at least direct you into like where to look for this and how to approach it.
Yeah.
Even if she's unavailable to actually be there. She'll
help you plan through stuff, and she has understands the cost of indie things as well. So you can $125 for one rehearsal. Yeah, that sounds about what I would expect. Talk to them, be honest about what you can afford, and don't. Again, it's all about just being open and honest and kind, and making it clear that you are asking for a favor. If you just say like, I want an intimacy director and I'm going to pay them $60, probably not going to get a good response. If you write to them, say, we don't really have the money for this, can you help me figure out like how we could best use your time and how we could do stuff? They'll probably help you with that. I know Siobhan, for example, she's lucky enough to work on some really big projects too, and because she can get paid properly by some of those, she's somebody who will to an extent negotiate some stuff for indie things. So just ask people. Okay, so as a fight director, I think she oops, I keep putting it in the wrong thing. One
we usually spend about $150.
Yeah, about $150, and that's having somebody herself or her partner, Matt. He's great too.
Thanks
Okay,
thanks
thank
for showing
you.
up.
Yeah, we'll post all of this online after.
Yeah,
He's
so we
already
can catch
gone,
up.
but that's okay. I know this is so long. I'm sorry, guys, but we didn't think it would take this long. But okay, so 150 there. Assistant stage manager. This is where we often get our student volunteers. We don't pay them. They get their volunteer hours, and we give them something at the end. I'll put it in here. I guess it could go under CAS gifts as well, but we usually have 2 of them, and we usually give them like a $10 Starbucks card and a thank you card at the end. Just a little thing to show thank you. Production assistant is the same kind of thing.
We don't usually.
We don't tend to have, yeah, I usually have a student who we call a production assistant, and they do a variety of things depending on what they're interested in. And also, like our last show, I had the stage manager, we had the people, I still did come to every performance and go and help the stage manager who I was training set up stuff at intermission. So the sad reality is,
yeah, the buck stops with you as
yeah.
a producer. So if there's an unfilled position, then you have to be willing, if you are the one who's saying, I'm putting the show on, to go and fill in.
Yeah, so opening night, if you're all dressed up in your pretty thing in your heels, I'm still running around backstage, you know, making tea to fill in fake alcohol on stage. If you don't have money, you got to do more yourself. Load and crew. I think we did pay, yeah, we paid Graham, we paid a couple people. So I think we paid 2 people one time, like $50 each, and told them we'd give them lunch, and they were going to be there, we said, between 2 and 4 hours. Try and offer something for load-in because it's a physical thing. There are lots of actors and tech and stuff who may have the day off, and if you say, you know, flat $50 plus pizza, chances are you'll find somebody. I would really recommend trying to save that and not putting it on your actors. We have done shows which when only the actors loading in. Depending on the level of experience of your actors, some of them may refuse doing that. Mm-hmm. And it's great to have someone who knows a bit more about the stuff than someone just carrying it. Mm-hmm. Transportation.
Now this would be something like if you've agreed to pay for TTC or something, we don't usually do that.
No, we've done a few odd things and paid for a lift here and there, but we don't tend to, it's something that's come out of contingency if something odd has come up. So we'll leave that. So we're looking at, for our overall production labor cost, $720. Now, design labor. So I often do our set designs as well, and then hire someone to help put it together. I'll be the one designing this too, realistically. Oops, clicking the wrong thing. And so I don't get paid. Our lighting designer, I'm not going to put his name because I don't want to say how little he's agreed to do it for me before. But what I would like to pay him is more like $600, but I know that he has worked on shows.
I would say that 600 would be a minimum that you should expect to pay a lighting designer, and anything you get under that in indie theater is a favor.
Yeah.
Like a 600 is already a favor. But if you get somebody to agree to do something below 600, they're doing it because they are
your friend,
good friend, or they're very interested in the artistic thing of it, and it fits in.
For this person, I'm going to budget 400 because the last time he did a show for me, he did it for 150. But I've also done a lot of free work for him, and so this is sort of me being like, I know you're worth more than this.
Favors for people.
But I've done favors for you. See, I'm upping it from last time. That's another thing. If you get somebody to do work for you for very cheap, don't just expect you can always charge that little, because they'll start to feel like they're being taken advantage of. So I always like to say, this is a bit of a bigger jump, but you know, if I paid him 150 before, I'd say the minimum I can offer him this time is 250, and be like, I'm acknowledging you did me a favor. Can you do me another one? And I can give you a little bit more. Video production designer is sometimes connected to the lighting designer. I don't think we'll need one of those specifically for this. Sound designer. I often end up doing my own sound design, and I always regret it. It's expensive. Yeah, I'm gonna say 400 again for the person I'm thinking of, which again is low, but is somebody that I know did a larger indie show for 500, and
yeah.
So it's just to give you an idea of where the numbers are coming from. Prop master, that's always me, so there won't be anybody. Costume designer is me. I guess I will put my name in these two, and you can see how many of these things I end up having to do. Design expenses. What did you have this as assistants? I don't tend to have any assistants. If I did, it would probably be a volunteer. Yeah, so we're looking at our design labor as 800, which is very low. That's with me doing most of it myself and relying on things.
So the reason that we started with production and design, and why we generally start with that, is because without, like, that is what a show is. Like, there are certain requirements for buying things. Like, if you need to have a venue, and you need to have a set, and you need to have stuff to
well,
put
you don't
on a show.
need to have a set. Part of this is because I'm the director as well.
Right.
So it's us as producers and me as the director having a general image in our mind. We say, this is what I want to do and what I want people to see.
I still think that even if you are starting it without a team and you are simply producing, I still think that even if your set is black box $0 set, that is still a set, and it is a choice that you're making, but you still need to have that. Your venue can be a set in itself. But if you don't have those basics, then, like, those are, I guess in a business sense, those are like fixed costs, overhead costs that are like the barrier to entry. If you can rent a venue and have a set in there, and then you can put on a show. You need the people too.
See, I would adjust this a little. We're doing it this order because of the experience we have and knowing what type of things our company does. But you need the venue. The other thing you have to have right off the top is the rights.
That's true.
Which with us happens to be, we usually don't have to apply for rights, which is why we sort of went into it a little later. But if we were doing a typical show, you need a venue, you need the rights, and you need your performers. Mm-hmm. And again, we're doing a non-equity thing that's low paying, but if you're going to do an equity show, I would actually put that in sooner, because that comes with fixed costs, which are really easy for you to plug in. The same for if you're using any union like IATSE.
So I guess where my mind is going, any cost that you don't have room to negotiate, are things that you need to start with. Like, you need to negotiate those, I guess, before you're even putting on a show. You have to make some decisions based on these costs that are given to you, like a venue cost, like stuff you have to buy from a store, which has a price sticker on, right? Those are costs that you can't avoid, and you have to plan for before. And then you get to see how much money you get to negotiate with your actors and your designers and all of these people. And that's when you're deciding, can this show happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's a complicated.
It's a lot of back and forth. There's no like steps 1 to 10 on how to figure out a budget and produce a show. You're jumping back and forth between all different things and being like, okay, I think we can do it for this, and then finding out you can't, and then realizing, oh, this is cheaper than we thought, and all of that sort of stuff. So
yes,
exactly. About seeing the foundational cost before adding a team. So it was just written there, and it's very true.
Well, and deciding what's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you can put on a show in your front yard with no set, and use that set, and all of that is zero, and your focus is saying, I want to put something on that's going to pay actors, then that's your goal, and that's what you're going to start with. I want to pay actors this much, so all of the rest of my decisions are going to be based on that. I need to find a cheap venue and no set and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So you have to identify your priorities in putting something on, and then I would start from the highest priority. Well, that sounds bad, but you start from the
Well, how you'll match that priority. Like for us, the priority is selling tickets. And that, which maybe sounds obvious, but there are lots of shows where that's not necessarily the one. We don't tend to put on, it's not like it's just meaningless fluff, but we're not putting on something that's trying to like call for a social change or something like that. There's some groups where that's part of their mandate. So selling tickets is not necessarily their first priority. Their first priority might be getting across a message. And so it might be really important to have a certain design, and that is above selling tickets. So even if you're spending more money than you maybe should in something else, it works for them. For us, we want to sell tickets. So we know that we need the show to look good. It needs to be somewhere that people will want to go. It needs to be advertised well. And so that determines our things. And unfortunately, that can mean that the things that are, I don't want to say less important, but that are less important when it comes to meeting that particular goal are things like labor costs. But that goes back to, again, you also aren't trying to take advantage of people. It's like, well, why are we trying to sell tickets? Because we're trying to get a company established so that we can make more money, so that we can pay people properly.
And we want to sell as many tickets as possible so that we can do a profit share. Like
yeah.
we don't, as a company, like the company takes one share,
yeah.
which is the same amount that an actor gets,
yeah.
right? The company doesn't take, it's not like we take, I've heard of some profit shares where it's like 50% of the profit goes to the company and 50% is used in a profit share.
Yeah,
and
we don't do that.
That's, I think that you have to be like, I mean, that's our own personal opinion.
That's my own opinion, that's
and you can structure anything the way you want it to, but it's about finding, again, those goals and ways to create value and ways to best satisfy those goals.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So that said, getting now into our performance, here we have it broken up as lead actor, principal actor, supporting actor, course. The breakup here, that's more important. That's my budgie in the background. If you hear this weird noise, we have many animals in this house. Thank you, Felix. We have it broken down this way for if you're doing like an equity thing, then there are actually different minimum costs. For us right now, because this story isn't written, I don't know exactly how I'm going to break it down. So I'm going to just put it all in one category and say that we've just got, I'll just do in capitals to remind myself to change this, all actors, there's 6 of them. So the number of actors, 6, flat rate. And because we're trying to do a profit share, Felix, we're doing a low guarantee. So we're just going to say $50 as a flat rate. The reason we're doing a flat rate even with a profit share is because we will likely be trying to do this under an equity collective agreement. And you have to have a guarantee of money.
For Dora.
Oh, it's for the Doras. That's what it was. We're a member of TAPA. To be eligible for the Doras, you have to be paying actors something. I guess in theory we could pay them $1, but it seems like a real asshole move. So we decided $50 was a low achievable amount that would still make us qualify. And hopefully everyone will get paid much more than that. So again, you could break it up all in here, but right now we're just going to have it for that. Sad little small number there. Marketing. Okay. Marketing labor is going to be me again. So there won't be.
And generally in any productions, the producer is going to be handling the marketing.
Yeah.
It would be very rare for you to hire a marketing person, which is different than a publicist, for example, but could, I mean, I guess you could put in there, but
yeah,
we could get
it's probably us. So for our advertising costs, now, a general rule for how much you should spend on marketing overall is 10, right? 10% of your overall budget. So what you really should do is fill in the rest of this. Look at this terrifying grand total of $14,894 and say, okay, what's 10% of that?
$1,500.
$1,500. And that's what we should split out in the marketing here.
So why don't we fill it out in a perfect world? What we would, if I just wanted to plan out the marketing for a show like this, what I would like to spend, like research shows that that on social media you should probably be spending at least $100 a month in the months leading up to it.
So
that's
we'll
actually
do-
social media, not online.
Oh, sorry. So social media.
And social media is probably the number one thing that you want to,
So we'll do that over 2 months.
It's going to be the most
bang for your buck.
Yeah, exactly. You reach the most people, and that's our main thing. In indie theater, it's word of mouth.
And when we say social media versus online, that's like, you know, boosting a post on Instagram or Facebook, something like that. Online ads can include things like Google AdWords, and like specifically purchased ads on different sites as well. Like
Mervish sells
Blogto.
Now Toronto.
We should probably make a list of that at some point and put that up on the site as well. So online, print, geez. This is never a fun one to do because we basically always figure out what we'd like to spend and then look at it and go, oh, we can't possibly. One that you should consider that is not necessarily as unachievable as you'd think is TTC ads. They're through Pattison. They're not cheap, but depending on where you're putting on your show and how long your run is, they could be worth it. So here we're planning a 3-week run. So I would say that a month of TTC ads that start a week and a half before we open and run through most of the thing. If there was a streetcar line that takes us directly there, then that could be worth doing. So do you remember what our...
Yeah, so if you're talking, the cheapest one that you can do is I can post, I think it's public knowledge.
Yeah, I think if you, I'll type Pattison. And
no, you won't be able to get it online. You have to request a sales agent to get
No, but I'm just saying who they ask from. Pattison is the name of the company that does all the billboards and everything.
Schlosser is the representative. But anyway, you can get a list of how much things cost. So the cheapest one is are the ones that are on the roof of
in a streetcar,
buses and streetcars, and they're $75 per ad for a month. Now, the thing you have to recognize, that sounds really good, but a single ad is so unlikely to be seen. So you need to put a few of those up. I believe that Julie, you can add, when you reach out to these people, then you can really talk to them, like their understanding, and their job is to help you build an effective plan. But generally you're going to be spending at least $500 to get anything that affects ticket sales at all. Yeah, that sells 10 tickets would be like, it's, I mean, you want to, hopefully $500 would sell approximately 20 tickets. Yeah. To make
don't make me do my mental math. Let's say that we're going to pay for 8 of those, which is a small number. We're going to pay it once because we're going to have it run for a month, but of course, starting before we open, there's no point in it running after. And those are $75 each. So you're looking at about $600. Print ads depends very much on who your demographic is. If you're reaching out to older people, it's definitely worth trying to put it into like a major paper like the Star or something. Print ads are super expensive. Yeah. So you really need to think about that.
Another one, if you want to, like if you do have some money and you want to, or a donation or something like that to get it out, something like Mervish or Soul Pepper, they'll sell ad space in their programs. And what you're doing then, when you're thinking about places to advertise, you want to be as effective as possible. So you want to find the people who are the most likely to go see your show. So think of large theater companies. The people who go to theaters to see a show are the people who are going to see your show, likely. Theater goers are generally the same people go to multiple shows rather than people going to one show a year. So those are probably better spends. I know Mervish, like if you get into, say, Come From Away, one of their big shows at the Princess of Wales, they'll put it in, you can only buy it for the entire run of the show, but for a full page ad, you're looking at like $6,000. So it's an expensive one, but it's very likely to have a return. And so that's the sort of thing you have to think of. And a good way to evaluate whether or not it's worth it is to think of how many tickets does that ad have to sell in order for me to make back that money.
When you're looking for sponsors for your show or something, that can be a good place to have some of this researched. Maybe say, okay, we can't afford $6,000 as it is now, but say you go to a car dealership, you go to Fiat and say, we want you to sponsor our show. We want you to be the named sponsor. And one of the things we can do, if you can give us $6,000, is we will have an ad that says, Fiat supports this indie company and has their name in there too. So it's advertising for you as well as them. And that can be a way to get sponsors involved and to cover some specific costs.
Yeah, it's actually, if you're budgeting a show based wholly on ticket revenue, and you're fairly confident that your tickets are going to pay for putting the show on, then all of a sudden you get to focus on finding sponsors to pay to improve your marketing, to get more people out, to increase your ticket revenue, and donations and those sorts of things that, again, you can choose to either funnel right into basically profit, or to pay for more marketing to get those ticket sales up, because ticket sales are, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to get the best return.
Yeah. And we won't go into this a lot now because it's outside of that, but as a general thing, I would say when you're talking to sponsors, look at using their money towards marketing, because it's really easy to show them what kind of return they would get. And when you're talking about donations, doing a GoFundMe or something, instead of just saying, help us put on the show and cover the whole thing, because there's so much competition, have something specific like, this money is going to pay these actors this much money, and find the stuff that pulls on the heartstrings a little more, which is usually a human connection. If you say to people, we want you to help us raise $6,000 so we can buy ads, that doesn't have the same effect as we want to pay these people who have been working on this and putting, in their time and energy.
Now, the most effective way of marketing, and I think we mentioned this in the last one a bit, is still going to be word of mouth. And the best way to get that out is to, if you have a story that is like something interesting for readers, reach out well in advance and try to get an article written about your show or your group. Get reviewers out.
Blogs, check out podcasts like Stageworthy.
Yeah, just getting anybody who will let you talk about your show, get it on there, and then share it on social media and try to get, without paying necessarily.
Even people who just, social media, not influencers in the way we see these beauty influencers, but look at our community and see what people are there that are often tweeting and talking about shows they've seen. Those are people to reach out to too and be like, hey, I think you'd be interested in this thing. We'd love you to come to opening and just let us know what you think. More organic things like that. And making sure that if you're a company and you're putting on regular shows, keep in touch with the actors you've worked before. Help promote the stuff that they're working on and celebrate their successes with them. And they will remember you in a positive light, and they will keep sharing those things. And that's a really easy way to have, like, you do the work before and it's just going to keep happening for you.
So I guess the minimum you'd want to do what I would consider print would be printing some sort of poster to have at the venue.
Postcards.
Poster and postcards. Those are easy to get. They're fairly inexpensive. You get 1,000 postcards and a big poster for $300-400.
Yeah, I'm gonna say check out ePrint Fast is where I basically always get stuff. You can try and get print sponsors, but I'll tell you, every print sponsor is getting daily asks for free stuff, so it's unlikely. ePrint Fast is online. They're reliable. You get them pretty quick. They're pretty cheap. They have sales regularly. I usually budget about $200 for that, and that gets us like 50 posters. And you don't need to get, people always, I have so many postcards sitting around. Don't get more than 500 postcards unless you know there's someone who will take them, because you can ask your actors to hand them around. They're not going to hand out that many. People don't have time. But if you know that there's another theater that's putting a show on that's willing to put them in their programs or something, like ask a little bit before you buy them, so that like it's not a huge amount of money, but then you're not wasting paper. So I'm going to say $200. I keep clicking out of the thing, not 200 there. $200, we'll do that. We haven't put in here anywhere the cost of like printing and stuff, I'm realizing for
That would be
things.
a miscellaneous cost.
Yeah. Promotions, we can just go over some of this quickly. There are some radio ads you can do. They're also very expensive. So again,
running a promotion is different than buying a radio ad as well. Running a promotion would be like giveaways, where you are saying like, if you're giving away 10 tickets, then the cost of a promotion would theoretically be $300.
Yeah.
The cost of the program. That would generally be a printing expense rather than a marketing expense.
Yeah.
We could talk a lot about programs because we personally have some different views on how a program can be distributed. What we're going to start transitioning into is actually offering online programs that are easily accessible for most people so that they can get the information that they want. It would be good to still have a number of printed ones for people who, yeah, that's the cost of the she's asking. Yeah, that's what I'm answering.
Yeah.
So, so printing those off, you maybe have a few. We've been talking about having more in-depth ones that we would actually sell.
Yeah, again, that depends on what information you have to do.
But to print a program, it depends on how in-depth you want to be. We usually do 4-page programs.
Yeah,
and
2 pieces of 8.5 by 11.
Honestly, one of the cheapest places to go is Staples. You can print black and white for 10 cents a page or color for 50 cents a page.
That still adds up really quick though.
Yeah.
If you find that you're doing this regularly, we invested in a good, well now it's broken, but it was a good printer. That's the cheapest over time, definitely, to buy yourself a printer and to look into what ones are good with ink usage and have cheap ink. Because when we've done that, I have budgeted $100 for the program, and that covers the cost of buying a new thing of ink and the paper, and it usually actually costs us more like $40.
So I guess you can consider that advertising expense. That's something you can kind of put in any category that you feel it best represents what you're making a program for. So
I'll write program printing here.
300 is usually what I end up spending if I print all of our programs.
Okay, so we'll just do that as a
500
flat. Okay, yeah. People do like programs too. Even if you want, like we have been trying to find ways to use less paper, both for cost and sustainability. But I was involved in a show that decided they didn't want any programs, and we had a lot of complaints. So I would recommend having some there, especially if you get older people again. But I mean, personally, I keep a program from every show I've been to. So even if you're just printing a one-sided thing.
Or using your postcards.
Using your postcards, yeah.
It's a way to just list who everybody is. The biggest thing people want to know in a program is just who's involved.
We should do a thing on how to do a program design too. Add that to our list. Okay, so now we have gone roughly over things. Stuff we haven't included yet are more detailed things about, like, if we're printing the scripts for people, what that cost is going to be. When we're buying food for people, that's going to be some specific stuff. This is like, despite how long this has taken, this is a really general, basic one. So you see our grand total now is a bit over 16,000. We go back to our revenue projection.
If you go to the top sheet, easiest place to see.
Yeah.
Then you have the difference you can see very easily that you have a $16,000 budget, a $13,000 revenue, and a profit loss, that's what PL stands for, of a loss of $2,500.
Yeah.
So then you have to decide at this point, am I going to decrease my budget, or am I going to try to fundraise or gather that $2,500 in another way? And if I can't do that, you still have to decide what you're going to cut, or if you're just going to cut the show.
So now I'm going to really, really quickly go through and show you the first things I would do when that happens. So I go through and find all the spots where I'm getting paid and go, oh, guess I'm not getting paid this time. So take out the rights there. Yeah.
We as producers
we get cut
always
first.
Yeah, you're the last one to get paid, no matter what. Even if you budgeted yourself to get paid, you are the last person that gets paid. And it's more likely that you will take, like even in high value productions, even if you're putting on $100,000 productions, the producer is the one who's more likely to take a share of profit and pay everybody else and say, I'm just banking on this going well.
I'm going to limit my props too and say, okay, I'll make use of stuff I have. I'm going to cut that down to 150. These are things we can't really change too much. Posters, postcards, we're going to try and leave those in right now. Now we're going to go over to our revenue projection and look at our ticket prices and say, okay, maybe we need to add a fee that we're going to keep to these. Let's say we're going to up this by $2, these by $1 each. So now our projection has gone up to 14,483. And very quickly, we've changed our loss down to 1,180, right? In a very, very quick time. So then what I would do is keep fiddling. I would go through and see where we can change stuff. I would go and play with the numbers and see, well, how much more can we charge?
Another nice thing, just quickly, is that you see your loss is less than your contingency right now. So that means you're in a good spot, right? Because your show can happen at this point.
Yeah.
If everything goes perfectly. It won't, so we want to keep cutting it down.
Yeah, my goal would be to get it so that there's no loss and that we're at a because again, if we're doing a profit share, you need to make sure you're making a profit. But I would say, looking at this, the most that I want to spend on this show is probably like 14,500. I would say is like a reasonable amount to do this 3-week run of what I'm thinking. Yeah, so you just keep moving some numbers around until you get into something, and you make it to a point where you're like, I'm charging the most I can, I am spending the least I can, I'm still off by $1,000. Okay, you need to raise it, right? So look for sponsors. That's actually a fairly small amount for a sponsor.
Or for multiple sponsors.
For multiple sponsors. So that's the thing too, right? It's like what they say, 80% of the money you get is going to come from 20% of the people that give money, right? And 20% of the money will come from 80% of them. So when you are looking for sponsors and you're reaching out for donations, you usually get about a 1% success rate, which is horrible, but it's worth doing. So if you're looking for donations or sponsors, expect to reach out to at least 100 people and get like one positive response.
Though we can do a whole other thing on sponsorship, because that's a very complicated space to talk about, and something that we aren't even very successful at.
Well, because we don't have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
We don't have a venue. We have done fairly short run shows. Change the number of shows from 16 to 8, and it threw off the formula in the top sheet, specifically projected PL.
Try putting.
So we'll do that
go
here.
To revenue projection.
Revenue.
Type in 8. and hit enter.
Enter.
And let's see what happens in the top sheet. So is this, Diana, is this what you're getting?
Oh, it's probably
Oh.
just not big enough. So if you see those pound signs, do the little double click on the line in between, or click and pull.
Right, it's locked.
It's locked?
Yeah.
So she can't even move this? Oh.
Yeah. I will fix that, because so if you what can I tell you to do? So that just means that the number is too big to
She can't change
show.
any of this, eh? None of the. That's weird. Why doesn't it do it in ours? Oh, we can't do anything. Yeah, so the formula is not messed up. It means that the number can't fit in that size cell, and normally you would just go and do what I did to drag it, make it fit.
So Diana, if you right click on top sheet at the bottom here, you'll see where this says protect sheet, it says unprotect sheet. If you click that, then you can go up and move.
Yeah, it's fixed. I'll change the zoom.
Okay.
There you go. Beautiful. Yeah, so you see that if we do that few shows for this kind of thing, we're screwed and we can't possibly do it. Yeah. So we could talk a lot more about that, but we've been talking for a very long time. Yeah. Does anyone have any specific questions, or is there something you feel we completely glossed over that's related to budgets or contracts? Yeah, we've got two people. Hello.
Hi. Might as well see me.
Consider independent contractors and ESA rules do not apply. So.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a complicated and a short answer to this.
Yeah, independent contractors, as a general rule, they are governed differently under the Employment Standards Act. There are still you have other considerations that you have to do, but things like turnaround times, hours in a day, those sorts of things are not often don't apply to independent contractors. What's more common when you hire an independent contractor is that you say, like, I need X, Y, and Z done by this date. And you don't care how they get it done, as long as it's delivered on that date. And you may have check-ins and ways to talk to them and keep communication open. But other than that, that's just what it is. You do still have obligations under such things as the Human Rights Code, there's a lot of different legislation that you have to keep in mind. You have to provide safe workplaces. Mm-hmm. You have to, and they may be governed by unions, guilds, or trade organizations that have their own set of rules. So you just have to keep that in mind. It's not an easy blanket statement. Yeah,
I mean, the thing I would say is with the size shows that we're talking about, technically we avoid a lot of it because we're not really, like, we're giving honorariums, we're not paying people, for one. So we don't even really have them as independent contractors. They're more like volunteers. So, like, on the one hand, it means that, yeah, the labor board couldn't come and enforce stuff with us, but at the same time, those rules are there for a reason. So I would still follow them. You still want people to be safe. Just like a general consideration for people would be like, let's not make you work for 12 hours a day, so there might not be something that's legally making you do those things, because basically we're small enough that we're kind of under the radar and not really doing that, but follow as many of them as you can to just be a good person.
So Diana, I see
timelines for a 3-week run to hiring to strength.
Oh, awesome.
Oh yes, rehearsal costs.
Yeah, so rehearsal costs we did forget. Thanks for pointing that out. So
So for me, I budget
80
80 hours of rehearsal time. And I do that regardless of the size. Well, not regardless of the size, but for any play we're doing, not for like a one night little cabaret thing, but for any full production we're putting on. Because we can't pay people anything for rehearsals and we can't pay them well for the show, I spread it out to accommodate people's schedules. So that usually takes place over about 2 months. But depending on the time of year, it might be even longer. When we did Rear Window, it went up in March. But because I knew, for one, that casting might be difficult because I need a really strong lead for the one, I did casting in December. And I didn't have anyone start until the new year in January. And I think we met, we met like a couple times in January, and I gave everyone the scripts and we kind of talked about it and then left them to do stuff. Yeah, and then we got really into rehearsals for like the 6 to 8 weeks before we opened. I mean, a lot of that's personal preference. That's what I've always done, but you talk to your director. But for budgeting, I would say 80 hours is realistic. If they're going way over that, if they want to do like 250 hours, they probably shouldn't be directing. But also, if they're saying they can do it in 6 hours, it's probably not very fair to your actors.
And when you're budgeting, you have to consider like what you're asking of people. So if you want to do a standard 2-week rehearsal period where it's like a full-time job, you're taking income away from people. So we wouldn't do that because we can't afford that. You have to replace that income.
Yeah, we'd have to pay them a minimum of $15 an hour to be able to even offer that to somebody.
So then conversely, if you're not doing that, then you have to be respectful of their time, and therefore we offer, before we even send out a rehearsal schedule, we ask people to give us their work schedules. We ask people to give us when they're available and free, and we work around that. Obviously, sometimes it's not perfect, and sometimes you have to ask people to book time off and do things for you. But by having that conversation early, then you can usually work around people. Now, in terms of booking a rehearsal space, you have to talk to your director and find out how much of the time that you are rehearsing requires space, or like a rented space. Lots of it, if you're doing readings or
and any table work, you could probably do it at someone's home. We live in Weston, which is in Toronto, but it's way out the one end. We have space to do that, but it's a bit of a trek for people. So you have to balance that too. When we lived more downtown, we had more rehearsals at home because it was easy to get there. If we had a lot of rehearsals here to save money, I would probably be offering some actors, depending on where they live, some money for transportation, or we have a car, so we might pick them up.
Pick people up.
You just have to be considerate of that. Otherwise, assuming all of your actors are living somewhere in Toronto, you want a space that is accessible, ideally has Wi-Fi, and is clean. And it's great if you can use the same space over and over again. And it's even better if you have somewhere where you can tape out the stuff on the floor. Some directors are really specific about that. I don't personally bother. But you need to talk to your director and find out like what do they need in terms of like how many props do they expect to have at rehearsals? Do they need to have the exact stage dimensions there, or can they be like, this is roughly the size, and you sort of fake it? You can ask your actors how they feel about it as well.
So in terms of how to budget that, so I would say that for us, we end up in a space for 2/3 of the time, maybe half to 2/3.
Yeah, probably.
So let's say 60 out of 80 hours.
Yeah.
And then when you're looking at rehearsal spaces in Toronto, you learn pretty quickly which ones are good to work with and are not.
Yeah.
The ones that I continually go back to are the Winchester Street Theatre, which is in Cabbagetown.
I will write that one down too.
Their rehearsal rates are between $15 and $20 an hour for independent theater. The Assembly Theatre, which is in Parkdale, they charge, you have to talk to Lewis,
Yeah.
ask him his rates, but he has charged us as low as 15, but I don't think that's his usual rate.
No, but some of these too, if you're going to the same place, especially with
They'll
small
give you
ones.
discounts.
Yeah, if you went to assembly and said, we want to book 60 hours, we can pay you in advance, you can probably get a better rate. So keep that in mind as well. You know, talk to the places. You can ask for a sponsorship. It's probably unlikely, but the small spots, often they really need a guarantee of some money. So if you have a way of getting them a lump sum, then you might be able to work something out.
The other good places to ask are community churches.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the Bloor Street Uniteds and these large ones that have rental programs set up. But if you
go to a church,
if you go to a church,
yeah.
if you're part of a community that's based, that's church based, or even if just down the street you have a church and you're like, oh yeah, that church is always there. Churches have basements. Mm-hmm. Churches have community spaces. That's part of what they do.
Yeah.
If you go to them and explain what you're doing, explain the community impact, explain what you're doing, lots of times it can be very cheap or free. Yeah. So those are great places to
use your connections,
so,
like both what you have and talk to your cast and crew. Like neither of us go to church, but we've gone before and we've asked and said, does anybody here do that? And we managed to get for one show this almost all of the space for free, because we had an actor producer who was in it, who was very loosely linked to the community, but went in and was like, look at me, I'm a good church going boy, and it worked.
So usually I would budget that, like, we usually end up spending around $800 on rehearsal costs.
Yeah, so this is a little high.
If I was doing this, like, through this process, I would budget for $20 an hour.
Yeah. Because
that's
what most minimums are listed at.
It really, really, really is dependent on how, like, Emily is wonderful in that she is a very accommodating director. She can direct in almost any space and can visualize things without needing specific things. So that helps us a lot. But if you don't have that, then it's going to be more costly. And everything that's more specific, anytime you can't make compromises is going to add costs.
Well, and also we tend to do like chamber dramas and stuff set in one thing. True. If you're doing like a huge show, if you're doing a musical, this cost will be way higher. If you need a dance floor, if you need mirrors, if you need a piano, all of that's going to really jack up the price. So, but budgeting here for, like, if you're just doing a general one location kind of set, $20 is a good guess. And personally, we usually end up spending closer to $15, but that's with doing some negotiation. Toronto Contemporary Dance Theatre, yeah, that's another one.
This is it. The Winchester is actually owned by the Toronto Contemporary Dance Theatre, so it's the same rates. But if you need dance space and mirrors and that sort of thing, then they have all of that.
Yeah.
So those are, and that's also in Cabbagetown. So those are always my first call.
Yeah.
Are those two.
They're very nice.
Because it's just, it's very easy.
One last thing to consider with that too, talking to spaces, cash flow is often a problem for these. Personally with us, like we put our own money into it, and fingers crossed you can get it back.
Before you say that, I think the getting it back, something we haven't mentioned yet is that when you're budgeting based on revenue projection, you have to remember that revenue is coming in sometimes up to 4 weeks after your show closes.
Yeah.
So,
and that these costs could come up as much as 8 months before the show opens.
Yeah. When
we're talking about venue. So that's a whole other thing we haven't talked about, raising money. But yes, it still has to come from somewhere, even if it comes back, whether that's from you, whether you've got people who are willing to give you loans, however you go about it. What I was going to say with the rehearsal spaces is because that is like a regular cost that comes up. We often talk to spaces to be like, can we kind of give you like a lump sum here and some here? Can we spread out costs instead of paying day by day? It depends on where you're getting your money from, but that's a thing to consider with some of this. And the same with paying your labor costs. talking to them about like, is this something that's paid up front? Can we pay it after the show? How many days after the show? Can we do it in installments? All of those are things to consider as well. And it's going to depend completely on where your money is coming from.
And remembering that you're balancing benefits. So like we said with assembly, if you can offer upfront costs before you use their space, that's a benefit to them. However, and you might be able to get it cheaper. But if you look at larger companies like Winchester and Canadian Contemporary Dance Theatre or ballet schools, or these people that already have things basically paid for, then you're paying more, but you might actually be able to say, can I pay you when I get my ticket revenues? And have more flexibility in when. So
yeah,
it's,
okay.
Any other questions?
I can't believe we've talked this long.
3 hours.
We need to do now like a 10-minute condensed version of this, because who is going to watch this over again? Thank you for sticking it out, guys. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can always write the TITC@gmail.com. I encourage you to look at our website. I encourage you to sign up as a member. Again, it doesn't cost anything. It's just sort of giving a commitment to following our code of conduct, which is basically just like being a decent human being, and then helping to support fellow people. We've got some big stuff that we're working on that we're hoping is going to start up in September, some big plans for the TITC. We are currently just trying to get more people to know about it. So if you like this, share this stuff, tell your theater friends about it, get people to follow us on social media, because the more people we can get interested, the easier we can get sponsors. And that's what we're trying to do, so that we can put that money back into the little communities that on their own would not be able to get that kind of support. You can read all about that on our website. So thank you very much for coming. We will wrap this up. And if you have ideas for other things, yes, yeah, no kidding. If you have ideas for other stuff you'd like to see something on at the alumni, okay. Yeah, I thought I recognized your name. I don't know, I see people's names around. Yeah, we've done a few shows at alumni. I'm sure we will be back there again. That's our go-to when we need like a traditional style theater, because it's by far the most affordable traditional theater. Yeah. Yeah, so if there's anything you'd like to see us do one of these on, an in-depth one like this, or like our last one that's a bit broader, let us know, send an email, put it in the comments, whatever. We need stuff to do during COVID, so great. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Stay happy, stay healthy. Bye.